This is a compilation of over 2 hours of Fallout's most disturbing lore. Explained, so sit back, relax, and grab your popcorn. Let's kick things off with Fallout 4. Every installment of the Fallout series seems to include just a bit more of the unknown, leaving mysteries hidden around every corner that reflects the deepest corners of our imaginations. So today, we're exploring every supernatural mystery in Fallout 4, starting with a secret location that holds a dark and unpleasant secret. 1. The Grantchester Mystery Mansion. In the Nuka World DLC, south of the Nuka World Junkyard, you can find a curiously intact pre-war mansion that has a gruesome mystery held within. This is the Grantchester Mystery Mansion. To get in, you will have to present a ticket to the Protectron that stands outside, which isn't too hard as there are plenty on the ground behind him. The mystery begins with the story of Hannibal and Morticia Grantchester, though one could say it didn't really begin until Morticia nearly died after giving birth to their daughter, Lucy. A narrative reveals shortly after entering the mansion that Hannibal never wanted a child and resents her for the near death of his wife, which could not have been good for the psyche of anyone around. Morticia loved Lucy, though everyone else in the girl's life would go on to view her as the spawn of Satan. Her elderly mother would often read her stories written by Mary Shelley, Edgar Allan Poe, and the history of the Borgias, who were Renaissance Italy's most infamous family. The Borgias were said to have committed adultery, incest, theft, bribery, and murder. Their murders were most often committed by arsenic poisoning. This may have been what led to many of the bizarre behaviors that Lucy would go on to express. Lucy was mostly isolated by her parents due to her often cruel behavior. Her only friends were whatever small creatures she could capture. She would play with them until they were dead, after which she would skin them and nail them to the undersides of furniture. She put some of them in her father's favorite stew while it was being cooked, leading to Hannibal's favorite cook quitting and declaring Lucy the spawn of Satan. This was no ordinary cook, as she had previously worked at a prison and was no stranger to dealing with the worst of the worst. She was their longest-serving cook, having worked there a mere 5 months. After that, Lucy's behavior would lead to many of their servants quitting. Morticia would complain of ghostly chills afflicting her as she walked the halls of the house, believing that there were evil spirits lurking just out of sight. She would acquire advice from a psychic named Madame Scarlata, who would instruct her that fireplaces would ward off evil spirits from the house, which she convinced her husband to construct. This led to Lucy becoming fascinated with fire, which she exhibited by throwing small creatures into the many fireplaces so that she could watch them burn. As Lucy's behavior became more and more strange, Morticia would become more and more convinced that their daughter was possessed. Morticia would continue to acquire the help of Madame Scarlata, who believed that the evil spirits could be driven out from Lucy by confusing them, which led to Morticia convincing Hannibal to set up a series of rooms that were designed to throw off the evil spirits. Madame Scarlata would frequent the mansion to conduct seances as yet another attempt to drive out the spirits and save Lucy, though Lucy would sit in the room above as they conducted them and knock on the ceiling. Despite the seances, Hannibal would often beat Lucy, as he believed that it would be the most effective way to cast the evil spirits out of her. Morticia ordered a stairway to be built that led to nowhere, ending at a wall in an attempt to confuse the evil spirits she thought to be possessing her daughter. She would also have a room built where all the furniture hung upside down from the ceiling, as if the room had been flipped. One morning, Hannibal would enter the upside-down room and find a doll that was designed to look like him hanging from a noose tied to the furniture. Throughout the mansion, you will find many doors that open to dead ends. These were built as yet another attempt to confuse the evil spirits, with deadly booby traps placed just outside of them, possibly to give the impression that they lead to real rooms. Those traps seem to have been put there post-war by an AWOL gunner by the name of Zachariah, whose handiwork can be found through a series of locked doors, which leads to a pile of the fresh bodies of traitors stacked in a nearly empty room. As rumor began to spread of the strange construction projects happening at the Grantchester mansion, Hannibal and Morticia would become shunned by the former elites of high society that they had previously considered their friends. As time passed, Lucy would make her first attempt at killing her parents by putting poison in their dessert. This incident would cause lasting health effects to Hannibal, rendering him unable to walk without the assistance of a cane. When Lucy would get too close to him, he would smack her with his cane and beat her until he tired. Things would only get worse when one morning, Hannibal was impaled by a rusty spike that had been placed in his shoe. Hannibal would go up Lucy's room in order to beat her once again, as he believed her to be responsible. No one will ever truly know what unfolded there, but if Lucy is to be believed, she held the scissors in self-defense as Hannibal came to beat her with his cane. With his foot wounded, he would trip and land on the scissors, which passed through his eye into his brain, though authorities would question why his fingers had also also been cut off, she would tell them that it was so he could never beat her with the cane again. That same morning, Morticia would also be found murdered in her bedroom. The exact cause of her death is unknown, though she had rope burns along her arms and a doll stuffed in her mouth. Though rope would never be found, Lucy would claim that it was the doll, who lashed out after it had been denied a goodnight kiss. After her parents had been murdered, police would search Lucy's room to find knives, makeshift weapons, animal bones, toxic substances, and a journal that had been written in a code that they could not decipher. This would lead to her being committed to an asylum where she would escape on her 18th birthday. It was 9 days after that when she was found hung in the attic, with police ruling it a suicide. Curious enough, if you look up at the windows as you first arrive at the mansion, you can see a little girl staring at you from inside the mansion's attic. Zachariah seems to know nothing of this girl, but he does write in a terminal that he has heard a girl's laughter, though he attributes it to a malfunctioning robot. The attic can be entered through the room where Zachariah is, though he will have to be killed to obtain its key. Surely, killing Zachariah will spare many from meeting the same fate as those that he has stacked in the kitchen's basement. Entering the attic, you'll see a little girl who will run into a nearby doorway while laughing. Following her leads to a dead end, another fake door. Could this be Lucy's ghost, tied to her childhood home where she had suffered so much abuse at the hands of her father? With good reason too, as it seems that the Grantchesters may have been played for fools. Years after Lucy's death, the house would be put up for auction. Curators would investigate the room where the seances had been conducted to find a variety of hidden speakers, tripwires, fog machines, and other devices that Madame Scarlata had used to stage false seances. This led many to believe that Madame Scarlata had been taking advantage of Morticia's belief that there were spirits in the house to suck as much money as possible from the Grantchester fortune. This was further supported by trick candles having been amongst the many trinkets found throughout the house. So what do you think happened here? And do ghosts exist in Fallout? This next mystery dives deep into the depths of the darkest locations in Fallout, leading us to fear the forces beyond our understanding. 2. Terrors of the Deep. In Fallout 4, you can find a location known as Hugo's Hole. You'll know you found it because you will hear a gunshot as you approach. There, you can find the remains of a raider that had offed themselves after being transfixed by some kind of entity. A holotape can be found nearby him. He talks about wanting to go inside a quarry, as it had been too long, but he was cast from the rest of his group that resides there for acting far too strange. In the holotape, he further states that he could just kill them all, but the entity would not want that. Nearby, you can find a pre-war marble quarry that, if you choose to explore it, will reveal more than you could have ever expected. The mystery here is a dark one, with ancient ties, some of which can be found in previous releases as well as Fallout 76. To get inside, you'll be pitted against a large group of raiders that will test your skills, but once inside, it does not take long to start to unravel that all is not right here. The raiders appear to have been cooking the unfortunate wastelanders that they captured, above a large pyre at the center of the pit outside of the quarry. Whether this is related to whatever may have been communicating with Hugo is never revealed, but what is revealed is that the raiders had originally come to scrap all the pre-war metal that had been preserved into the mine to send back to the ironworks, their headquarters. It became evident that there was far less metal down in this quarry than they had initially expected, as a terminal entry states that a request for additional support beams than the limited number that were previously used had been denied, which would have led to accidents amongst the miners. Terminal entries would also mention that there have been reports of rumblings and instability all over the quarry. This is strange, considering that the mine is still pretty much pristine 200 years later. Later entries will talk about increasing incidents involving safety standards being cut. These include the lack of railing on drop-offs, lack of support beams, and a backlog of safety inspections. To combat complaint reports, management requests there to be no more complaint reports issued as they're probably already in the backlog. It becomes more and more clear that the management of the quarry does not care about employee safety, almost to a shocking degree, as management would hold a weekly happy hour where miners were allowed to drink on the job. Despite management stating the lack of employee safety measures were due to budget cuts, they would upgrade the boring equipment regularly, though it would not increase the yield by much. This seems suspicious, as if they're trying to cause as many casualties as possible. The whole quarry will start to rumble, and the sole survivor will be granted visions from a dark source depicting the workers there before the war. As you go further down into the mine, you'll find reports that all the workers were being called down to station number 4 to gather for some odd reason. This would also be where raiders were sent to deal with a feral ghoul problem, though the raiders would never return after being sent. Raider leadership down in the quarry would eventually plummet altogether, with one going insane and writing "I'm safe in the light" over and over again in a terminal entry. Inside section 4, we begin to encounter ghouls and find the skeletal remains of miners all over. As to what happened here, we will find out soon enough. Continuing further, further, you will find station number 5 that doesn't seem to have been mentioned in any other terminal, but a holotape can be found inside. This holotape, titled Tim Shoots, mentions that the crew at Station 4 still do not suspect their true intentions and believe them to be transporting equipment to a new section of the mine, but the author of the holotape, Tim Shoots, believes that they need to complete their plan quick, as the more serious supervisors might begin to question things. The visions will continue until you enter the last room of the quarry, where you'll be granted a vision of a pre-war sacrificial ritual involving a strange ritual blade. Evidenced by a holotape found on the ghoulified remains of Tim Shoots, management requested that all the supervisors meet in Section 4, where they were to discuss safety concerns. There, they were seemingly ambushed, tied down, and sacrificed to whatever entity is haunting the quarry. Strangely enough, this whole ritual site appears as though this chamber had always been there, long before it was uncovered by management of the mine. From there, you will find a hole in the ground filled with water, almost like a well. Going down this underwater shaft, you will come face to face with a colossal statue in a much wider chamber that resembles a Roman amphitheater, with pillars and stairs surrounding an altar at the center. It's on this altar that you will find an ancient blade of unknown origin known as Crimvish's Tooth. This is not the same blade as the one used in the ritual, unless it has undergone significant changes after the sacrifices, as it looks completely different. Could this blade have been what the mysterious management of Dunwich Borers were after the entire time? Shockingly enough, this mystery goes so much deeper, as we are introduced to a mysterious pre-war cult existing in the Point Lookout National Park in Fallout 3. This swampy marshland had never been hit by the atomic bombs, as the nuclear submarine that may have been tasked with that can be found beached, with its crew dead. Most of the locals are inbred abominations, mostly incapable of speech, and have been this way since long before the bombs were dropped. They are all part of a cult, which worships an entity called Ugg Qualtoth, though there is another member of this cult that brings to light more of the dark beings behind it. The only regular human that seems to revere Ugg Qualtoth is Obadiah Blackhall, who tasks the player with finding a family heirloom, a book known as the Krivbekni, and guides you to where the locals conduct ritualistic sacrifice. During this quest, you will meet a Christian missionary by the name of Marcella, who claims that Obadiah plans to use the Krivbekni to control the swamp folk. After meeting both Marcella and Obadiah, it becomes clear that Obadiah despises the other locals of Point Lookout, though it's unclear why. Perhaps it's due to how degraded their genetics are from the rampant incest, or because of the suspected theft of the Krivbekni. We can only speculate. However, he seems to covet the power that this book holds, as he may see it as a way to extend his life. Obadiah is very old, and the only chair he will sit in is a wheelchair, which has an oxygen tank next to it. Arriving at the ritual site, it becomes evident that the swamp folk had indeed stolen the Krivbekni, which lies in the middle of the shrine. The whole shrine is littered with gore, revealing the dark nature of the rituals that the Krivbekni hold the secrets of. Returning to Marcella, you'll find her dead, having been murdered by a group of smugglers hired by Obadiah to put an end to her interfering in his plans. She, however, left a holotape with instructions on how to destroy the Krivbekni, which seems to be the right thing to do, as these secrets in the wrong hands could devastate the wasteland. To destroy the Krivbekni, you will have to travel back to the capital wasteland, to the Dunwich Building, where you'll have to make your way to the virulent underchambers located in its basement. By now, I'm sure you're making the connection between Dunwich Borers and the Dunwich Building, as both were owned by the same company. It's also revealed that Obadiah is the great-great-great-grandnephew of Richard Dunwich. In the innermost chamber of the Dunwich Building, you'll experience a lot more strange happenings that you had overcome in Fallout 4. There'll be one feral ghoul who stands by a note that reads, "Sharp knife to send him to Deep Temple. Flay and say my words. Abdul comes again, on the Feast of the Weaker. Feast for the Deep Temple. Born again. Here. Al-Hazred Giyeth Giyeth." Near the note, you'll find the black obelisk. If you activate it, the book and all nearby feral ghouls will be incinerated in a burst of flame from unknown origins. The questline is over, and answers are never fully given, as they had planted the seeds for Dunwich Borers in Fallout 4. So could there be ancient gods brewing in the deep places of the Fallout series? Or could all this be due to gaseous fumes causing hallucinations for all those involved? This next one is hard to fathom, as so much of it does not make any sense and could just as well be hallucinations. We'll leave that up to you to decide. 3. Listening Post Bravo. Listening Post Bravo can be found nearby Dunwich Borers, and is one of the many military outposts found throughout the map. While it can be easy to overlook, you'll eventually have to go here during a questline involving Paladin Danse. There are no clear paths that lead to this listening post, and it's surrounded by hills and a dense forest. Inside, you'll find what looks to be just an average military station, though there is the skeleton of a soldier still seated at the desk he died at. As a security precaution, the elevator has been powered down and is completely inoperable. You'll have to bypass this by hacking into the terminal mounted on the wall next to it. With the elevator now powered, you can journey to the bunker below. Deep underground, you'll find 2 destroyed Protectrons and an offline sentry turret. It will mostly be what you expected. A military listening post, full of equipment used for just that, but strangely enough, there is a Yaoguai that should not be down there. Its home is a cave exposed by collapsed sections of the bunker. It has no way out and no way in, so it shouldn't be alive down there. But it is, which makes no sense and is very confusing. In its cave are 5 skeletons that are mostly soldiers who appear to have been stationed in the bunker when the bombs dropped. If this is true, then that means that the Yaoguai may have been down there for 200 years. But it couldn't have been, as a series of entries found on a terminal in this bunker sheds some light on what happened here, though it does not paint a clear picture. On Monitoring Terminal 03, operated by a Sergeant J.P. Renksy, we find a series of reports. LP Bravo Monitoring Report 10 seems to reveal that the skeleton at the desk on the surface level could be that of Captain Rutledge, who ordered Sergeant Renksy to take over the long-range monitoring duties for 4 weeks. During that time, he'd be completely isolated from the outside world. So we are left to assume that only one of the soldiers whose skeletons are found here were supposed to be there. So why are there plenty more? This isn't even where it gets weird, as the next entry, LP Bravo Monitoring Report 14, reveals that while Renksy was monitoring the low-band frequencies, which was mainly used to detect the frequencies used by outdated equipment, he detected a very cryptic message that repeated itself for an entire hour. The site was used to monitor Chinese spy networks, so he was surprised that it was in English, though the signal was full of static and hard to make out. The phrases Renksy could make out were "internal void," "dreams are getting darker," "blood runs so still," and DEK, the last of which he assumed to be a call sign. He would report the signal to Washington in hopes that they could decrypt what it could mean. He waited for days, hearing nothing back from Washington. Eventually, he would be woken up by a series of loud banging noises on the elevator door. Security measures prevented the elevator from being used during the 4-week period of each monitoring duty, so he activated the bunker's defense systems and took out his emergency rifle, preparing for an enemy attack. The banging at the elevator continued for almost an hour, when suddenly it stopped. Renksy soon began to feel as though this was somehow related to the mysterious broadcast frequency that he had intercepted. According to the entry titled LP Bravo Monitoring Report 25, it wasn't until another 5 days had passed that Washington finally responded to his message, stating that the holotape they had been sent by him was blank, something he would confirm himself when he checked on a second recording that he had of it. He would mention the banging he had heard, and they would suspect him to be experiencing auditory hallucinations from being isolated for so long, which he believed was possible as isolation could play tricks on the mind. They said they would send someone to relieve him of his duty so that he could recover. The final words of this entry would be, "Maybe I wanted to find a mystery to solve to occupy the time so badly. My imagination decided to take over. Whatever it was, I hope this doesn't go down on my permanent record." And then nothing else is revealed from there. We just find a Yaoguai that shouldn't be there with another group of soldiers rendered skeletons in a cave that shouldn't be there. The soldiers must have been sent there to relieve him, with more being sent this time to avoid the auditory symptoms of isolation experienced by Renksy. But where did the Yaoguai come from? Could the Yaoguai have been someone trapped down there by a survivor who cleverly thought of a way to imprison it so that he would not have to fight it himself? And what happened here could have been Renksy going insane from the isolation, attacking the soldiers that arrived to relieve him. With all the questions left by that one, this last mystery is more straightforward, but also leaves us with so much to question. For instance, what connection could this have to the Zetans in the ruins at Dunwich Borers? 4. The Ancient Crown. While parts of this next mystery could also be viewed as hallucinations, there is too much proving that aspects of it are so much more than that, leaving so many questions with few answers. To understand this mystery, we will first have to start where it began. In 1894, Lorenzo Cabot, scientist and archaeologist, went on an expedition to the Rub al-Khali Desert in the Middle East, searching for proof that there could be a precursor civilization, called Ubar, hiding below the sands. In the real world, Ubar is known as the Atlantis of the sands, and though many have claimed to have discovered it, none of their discoveries can be confirmed to be the mysterious city. Though many believed his theory that this civilization could exist to be insane, including his own son Jack Cabot, he would find vindication when he and his team unearthed a vast subterranean city that held within it the artifacts and remains that could not be of human origin. The pair, along with a team of locals hired as diggers for the expedition, would discover parts of the city. Though a sandstorm would brew and once more bury most of what they had discovered, they would eventually discover a sealed tomb of ancient design. They would remove its seal, which resealed, discovering a sarcophagus that held within it an otherworldly humanoid creature that wore upon its head a great crown. The local diggers were so terrified that they fled from the site, refusing to ever enter it again. Lorenzo would remove the crown from its head carefully, ordering the tomb to be sealed and putting an end to the expedition. That night, Lorenzo studied the crown and felt increasingly compelled by some unknown force to don the crown upon his head. The longer he wore the crown, the more he came to understand it and the civilization it had been from. He would realize that this could not be the city of Ubar he had been seeking, as no human could have designed what they discovered, and the ruins were far older than even the earliest of human artifacts. This crown, though ancient and alien, could somehow influence the mind of a human despite being far older than humanity. He would share his discovery with only his wife Wilhelmina, his son Jack, and his daughter Imogen. When he returned to his wife and children in Boston, he would be a changed man and intended to teach his family of his discoveries so that they could return to it together. The crown had made his physical state overall superior to what it had been, increasing his strength and ending any further signs of aging. It would also grant him powerful psychic abilities, but at the cost of his sanity. It's very strange that an alien artifact would be able to do this, as our DNA would be vastly different. For example, medicine intended to cure a specific ailment for a human would not necessarily work on a fish, a turtle, or even a bird. Over time, his family would become very influential in American society, though he would become increasingly paranoid, even violent, and begin to commit crimes that would have landed anyone else on death row. He could no longer remove the crown, as attempting to do so would cause him great pain, with the crown seemingly having bonded to his head. 4 years after his return, his personality would change so much that Jack Cabot would have him confined in the basement of Parsons State Insane Asylum to keep him from harming those around him. He accepted this, as it was the only way he could hope to convince his family that he was, indeed, sane and get them to return to the Rub al Khali Desert with him to continue uncovering what waited for them below its sands. Jack would study Lorenzo's blood and the crown in hopes that he could uncover a way to cure his father of its influence. Along the way, he would discover that he could use his father's blood to create a serum that granted his family the ability to temporarily gain the same healing effects that rendered his father ageless. Centuries would pass. Jack would continue to study his father's crown and use the serum to extend the life of his family, adding further safety precautions over time and paying off the asylum's staff to keep it all a secret. Why no one questioned this is beyond me, as most people would have raised an eyebrow at this. Lorenzo would remain in confinement for 400 years, while his son Jack continued to study the crown with his sister Imogen, who would begin to suspect that Jack was no longer trying to cure his father and was instead working to extend their lives permanently. After Jack had installed dampeners that prevented Lorenzo from using his psychic abilities, Lorenzo would begin to hate his family for what he saw as a betrayal and desired revenge. Trapped beneath Parsons, he would commune with the crown and gain more of its knowledge. Jack would employ the sole survivor to retrieve a shipment of the serum from a group of raiders that had intercepted his mercenaries as they were delivering it. Doing so would earn him their trust, and the Cabots would soon find themselves in further need of his service. Wilhelmina fears that Imogen might be in danger and sends the sole survivor to find her, where he would discover that she had joined a cult and convinced its leaders to let her return home. After freeing Imogen, she will reveal the dark truth behind the serum and leave ahead of the sole survivor, who will return to the Cabot house to claim their reward. But Jack is busy, as Lorenzo's psychic abilities have begun to overpower his prison, and he has compelled a group of raiders to invade Parsons State Insane Asylum, with Edward updating Jack of the situation. Jack and the sole survivor make their way to Parsons State Insane Asylum to fully access the situation and prevent Lorenzo from escaping. They arrive to find it completely overrun by raiders. Locating Edward wounded inside, they continue to fight through the raiders until they reach the basement where Lorenzo is being held, to find that the raiders have almost succeeded in freeing him from his prison. The sole survivor will talk to Lorenzo, who will reveal his story and some of the secrets of the crown. though it's clear that Lorenzo has gone mad over his long isolation. Jack will instruct the sole survivor to set the Abramelin generators to overdrive by flipped a switch, which would kill his father by flooding his cell with Lorenzo's cell with lethal zeta radiation. Upon flipping the switches and killing Lorenzo, Jack tells the sole survivor that had he listened to his father in freedom, he would have killed his family, continuing on to say that nothing would have stopped his father from returning to his criminal activity. Though he is sad that he has lost the ability to produce his immortality serum, Jack seems to have genuinely believed that with just a little more research, he could have cured his father and removed the crown from his head. Were these artifacts Zeton, or something far more ancient? These mysteries are amongst the many aspects of the Fallout series that inspire us to keep exploring, discovering new things around every corner, in every playthrough. Fallout's universe is filled with horrors, monsters, and mutants, all thanks to the corporate landscape, where companies operate without care for human life. Ethics become suggestions in a shredder, and where morality can be found in either very few people or never had any at all. So today we are going to explore what happened to the most evil companies in Fallout, starting with one that created a new kind of horror even before the war. Westtech, the company that turned progress into a crater. Westtech wasn't just a defense contractor. Westtech was the defense contractor, power armor, cutting-edge military research, partnerships with the government. The whole patriotism is a product deal. And the big one, the thing that makes Westtech a permanent stain on Fallout history, was their relationship with the forced evolutionary virus. FEV isn't just a science experiment in Fallout. It's the reason super mutants exist in multiple regions. It's the reason humanity as a concept gets blurrier the deeper you go into the lore. Westtech's research didn't just create monsters, it created a new category of problem that the Wasteland can't outlive. So let's ask ourselves, just what exactly happened to Westtech after the bombs? They got what every evil megacorporation deserves. Their legacy became a dungeon. Not the medieval type, but rather the remnants of offices with hulking beasts inside. In New California, a former Westtech research facility took a direct nuclear hit and became what Wastelanders now only refer to as the Glow, a literal crater of radioactive death that's visible at night. It might be poetic, it could even be symbolic, but it's definitely the universe making sure the punishment fits the crime. And that right there is the first insight into what happened. Westtech didn't disappear. It fossilized into geography. Their building didn't become history. It became an environmental hazard. It became a place where, even decades after the Great War, people look at it and remember why radiation is so dangerous. And those who head inside are met with even better reasons why the old world is best left alone. Those who seek to conquer it are either paragons of virtue, or just as bad as the companies themselves were. Now let's jump to Fallout 76. Westtech has a research center in Appalachia. You probably know the story. Scientists try to develop good things. Military and government types show up. Good things become very bad things. The research center ends up abandoned after the Great War. Employees try to contain their mess, dump a neutralizing agent, and bail. But the important part is what happens later. That facility is eventually rediscovered by Taggarty's Thunder, who break in, find the atrocities, and it helps convince them that Roger Maxon, founder of the Brotherhood of Steel, was right, pushing them toward forming the Appalachian Brotherhood of Steel. Let that sink in. Westtech's horrors didn't just create mutants and death zones. They helped create two factions. Not intentionally, of course. Westtech didn't sit there going, we should inspire a nightly techno-cult. But when your company is so evil that people turn it into a moral wake-up call, you've officially become a cautionary tale with a body count, and it keeps going. The facility is later poked at by Enclave scouts looking for ways to boost DEFCON status to nuke China even more, and even though the FEV was rendered inert, the leftover systems and data were still useful enough for more super mutant chaos. Not to mention that time that a former Westtech scientist and his buddies tried to make an improved version of FEV, only to create a doomsday virus that had to be stopped. So, what happened to Westtech? They became the kind of evil that survives the apocalypse. Not as a corporation, as an infection. Fitting, isn't it? And if you think that's the worst version of corporate legacy, don't worry. Because we're about to talk about a pharmaceutical company that basically speedran the path from executive to Raider King. Because you know what's scarier than than a monster in a lab or bred in a test tube? A monster who used to have a corner office, who calls the shots. Arctos Pharma. When healthcare is just a costume for control, Arctos Pharma is one of those companies whose work sounds normal if you say it fast and don't think about it too hard. What do they work in? Biopharmaceutical research and development. You hear that and you might think of vaccines, medicine, maybe some ethically questionable trials, sure, but nothing compared to the war crime tier stuff of Vault-Tec, West-Tec, or Med-Tec, right? Wrong. Arctos was running projects like Project Beanstalk before the Great War, testing chemical compounds on crop yields using modified Mr. Handys called Pharmabots, spread across multiple crop fields. That's already creepy because many Fallout companies very rarely do anything that benefits humanity without also doing something that benefits shareholders more. But what makes Arctos disturbing isn't just what they tested, it's the vibe. They were also engineering dependence, food, growth, chemicals, automation. If you control crops, you control survival. And that goes hand in hand with another test they were performing with the United States Space Administration, Project Z, a serum tested in deep space connected to an AI on Earth, creating a link between a subject's brain and a big brother-like entity. That's what it's about: control, monitoring. And then you get the key detail that makes this whole thing feel like a horror movie with a corporate logo slapped on the title card. Project Beanstalk was initially successful, but issues with staffing and a significant accident halted further research. Project Z took the lives of those simply meant to observe it and turned them into test subjects themselves. An accident, an experiment. In Fallout corporate language, accident usually means somebody got melted, mutated, or eaten by a thing that used to be a regular animal before the company got involved. And experiments range from something that could be seen as truly benevolent to something that would make even the worst of humanity lose their lunches. Now, here's the part where Arctos goes from bad company to Fallout corporate evil in a nutshell. David Thorpe. David Thorpe was an Arctos executive. The few snippets we get of his life before the war described him as using ruthless tactics to dominate the pharmaceutical market. Truly a cutthroat, which would make what would later happen to him both all the more fitting and all the more frightening. Just before the war, he takes a vacation, meeting up with other ruthless and rich business elites like him as he meets up with his mistress instead of having his wife along. Then the Great War happens, while they're out on the slopes. The war makes it so that their morals, their ethics, what little they ever had, no longer meant anything. They can do whatever they want. Their true monstrous selves are revealed. Thorpe becomes a prominent raider leader in Appalachia, along with his mistress turned new wife and partner, which is both horrifying and even weirdly logical, because Fallout loves showing you that the apocalypse didn't create monsters out of nowhere, it just removed the rules and let the existing monsters roam freely. David Thorpe didn't become evil because the world ended. He just stopped needing to adhere to HR or require a business card to introduce himself. Thorpe might perish later on, but the Raiders, the evil he created, would persist in the form of the Crater Raiders, who continue to harass the settlers and other innocents of Appalachia to this day. So what happened to Arctos Pharma? Their dream of controlling life through science didn't die. It scattered. Their labs became playgrounds for mutations and disasters. Their executives became raiders. Their so-called progress became just another wasteland problem you can trip over while scavenging. And all that's left is robots attempting to continue experiments useful to no one. And honestly, Arctos is a perfect example of a pattern that you can find not just in Fallout, but in real life. Corporations don't vanish. They shed their skin and come back as something worse. Okay, pharmaceutical experiments and raider executives are bad, but what if your company's business model was workforce disposable, cancer optional? Yeah, let's go underground. Atomic Mining Services, radiation into recursion. Atomic Mining Services, simply known as AMS, operated in Appalachia as a mining company tied into the whole industrial mess of pre-war resource obsession. Unlike a lot of traditional Fallout corporate evil, AMS is one of the most disturbingly realistic companies in Fallout, because its evil isn't cartoonish. It's not on par with the comical implication of, we worship a Lovecraftian god in the basement. It's worse. It's paperwork evil. Spreadsheets, dossiers, and intentional obfuscation. AMS was known to be particularly ruthless toward workers. They routinely handled radioactive materials, something even the most standard company knows how to handle safely. AMS didn't. And the company's response when their workers suffered? Wear protective gear all the time. It's kind of hard when you need to take it off to eat, drink, sleep, or do anything at all. But here's the part that makes my soul leave my body. body. Radaway, something Fallout establishes was rather common and affordable, was made intentionally not commonly available at AMS. Why? To increase profit margins. Who cares if you get a little sick from radiation? Certainly not the executives. And if you developed cancer from exposure, immediate termination. That's not sci-fi villainy. That's just late-stage capitalism with a Geiger counter. Imagine being told, "Congratulations, you have cancer. Please clock out, pack your things, and get out." That's not to mention how Ultrasight became AMS's golden goose, a nuclear power source that seemingly formed at random, capable of fueling nuclear reactors for centuries instead of decades, with far more power potential beyond that. All it cost was the homes, livelihoods, and everything else it took for the company to buy out your coal mining town, send some mercenaries in to force it from you if you don't agree, and then strip mine and destroy it until there's nothing left, all for maybe enough Ultrasight to fuel a single toaster. AMS also became infamous for automation, cutting workers and replacing them with Hornwright auto miners as fast as possible. Oh, and their means of mining? Dropping nuclear bombs into mine shafts. Really saves time on getting out coal and diamonds when you turn a 10-foot mine shaft into a 100-foot crater. So they're poisoning workers and replacing them. They're dropping bombs that they're sending said workers to dig out. It's like the company looked at the concept of loyalty and said, "Is that edible?" That's not counting that once Ultrasight was revealed to be a dud, and human workers turned out to be worse than robot ones, AMS started selling off some of its facilities to a group we would later find out would be none other than the Enclave, allowing the Enclave to begin studying Ultrasight themselves, even if they thankfully did not survive to harness its power longer than the short amount of time they had it. But what happened to AMS after the Great War? Here's the grim punchline. Mining doesn't stop being valuable just because civilization collapses. The war ends governments. It doesn't end greed. If anything, greed gets more honest. AMS's industrial footprint, its mines, its tech partnerships, and its corporate infrastructure, it all doesn't just magically evaporate. It became the skeleton of Appalachia's post-war resource conflicts. They were involved in developing auto miners, the creation of Ultrasight, and participated in building Watoga, a haven for the rich and powerful while kicking out the poor, alongside Robco. Their legacy is baked into the region. Automated extraction, worker disposability, and a landscape shaped by industrial exploitation. Exploitation that is still used by wastelanders, for good and evil, even decades later. AMS is the kind of company that would see the apocalypse and go, "Okay, but how will this impact our quarterly profits?" Now, if you hated AMS for treating humans like replaceable parts, wait until you see an energy company using a national park and a state park like private sandboxes, and turning a gas well into a covert murder platform. Baishi Company. We own your land now. Bishi Energy Company, Baishi Co., operated primarily in natural gas, a logical investment for a world running low on petroleum, and where nuclear power isn't good enough to sustain those who can't afford it yet. Still, natural gas kind of sounds boring, doesn't it? Well, that's until you realize where they were digging. In 2077, Bishi operated a research vessel called the USS Ozymandias and acquired rights in Point Lookout State Park to probe for natural gas resources. Point Lookout, the place that already feels cursed. Land development, creepy hillbillies, and the remains of Civil War corpses, who wouldn't want to visit? So they were basically doing resource extraction in a region that's practically begging the universe to punish anyone who messes with it. So what exact kind of natural gas formed at Point Lookout? Remember the Civil War? Bishop got it in their heads that the thousands of bodies that are under the earth would make a brilliant source of natural gas. As it turned out, the amount of gas, while there did turn out to be some inside, wasn't even enough to create more than 12.5 canisters. Oh, and they intentionally sent a geologist who they knew would be opposed to how they extracted it, with orders to kill her if she found out, and find out she did. But Baish doesn't stop at, "We're going to drill here," and kill anyone who dared to question it. They also commissioned the creation of a powerful assaultron unit, the imposter Sheep's Squatch. For what exactly? Oh, nothing. Just to bring down the prices of homes so they can buy up land rights and claim a monopoly. So, yeah, an energy company works with another morally bankrupt company that also designs nightmare robots. Totally normal, nothing suspicious. And in Skyline Valley, formerly Shenandoah National Park, there's a Bish-owned site called the Big Meadows Gas Well, Site 17. The background there is genuinely insane. The place had casualties, workplace deaths, and the usual pre-war corporate incompetence. The worst part is that in the end, it turned out the well didn't have nearly enough gas under it to justify the massive costs it took to build it. But then there's a worker named Harold Osborne who's acting suspicious, going up to the top of the extractor tower at weird times. Management starts flagging him like he's a communist sympathizer, because, of course, that's where their brain goes first. first. Except he isn't. He's a hitman. Osborn is an undercover operative directed by a high-level federal executive, and he sets up a sniper's nest at the top of the gas well tower to assassinate a target named Zeus, shooting into a convoy near Rapidan Camp, the White House of Appalachia. And the reason this is so Fallout-coded is that the scene is still there, untouched, implying it happened close to the Great War and nobody ever handled it. Awfully convenient, isn't it? Almost like someone knew that the war would happen, or perhaps it was a genuine coincidence. Now on to what happened. What became of Baishe after the war? Their corporate structure died, sure, but their projects, their sites, their machinery, their crimes, those stayed. You can even use their grotesque drilling and digging results as both a weapon and as resources to create your own tools of mass destruction. Bishi didn't leave behind a legacy of energy. They left behind a landscape filled with extraction scars and government corporate violence that never got buried. Alright, we've done military bioweapons, pharma experiments, radiation labor abuse, and corporate assassination. You might think we've hit peak evil. But what if the next company's horror was space exploration? After all, in space, no one can hear you scream. Repkon Aerospace, turning space into a sales pitch. Repkon is one of those brands in Fallout that gets remembered for vibes, rockets, space tourism energy. Blast off to the future, that kind of thing. But the deeper you go, the more you realize Repkon is basically the perfect example of how the pre-war world industrialized hope and then sold it back to you in pieces. Repkon was an up-and-coming regional aerospace firm and a contributor to Las Vegas political campaigns. They operated a test facility in the Black Mountains, with rocket launches that often went very wrong. So much so that locals complained about Repkon bombs landing in fields and destroying property, which is such a Fallout line. Because imagine living in a small desert town and being like, yeah, sorry I'm late. The aerospace company accidentally dropped hope on my corn again. It was founded in a time when the resource wars had just begun, and people needed something to believe in. Cut to 2 decades later, and all that could be found was failed launches and overly legal corporate jargon. Husks of rockets lay rusting under the gas station at Novak, while the test site and museum lay rusting and falling apart, showing how well that promise of blasting off to the future really turned out for the people of the old world. But right before the Great War, Repkon was purchased by Robco Industries in a hostile takeover, probably due to the destruction of their own launch facility, their careless handling of plasma and nuclear material, and their failure to make space mining a reality. After the takeover, new security countermeasures were installed and more militaristic plans were undertaken, especially after the discovery of a special radioactive igniting agent that interested certain senior Robco members. That's the moment Repkon stops being a space dream company and becomes yet another funnel for militarized tech, which is the most Fallout thing ever. Even space gets eaten by defense profits. Of course, it was only because they turned Repkon from a space exploration company into a weapon development company, developing the Q-35 matter modulator based off of stolen Poseidon energy schematics in a bid to improve on the ancient P-94 plasma caster. And given that design happens to show up in mass production in Fallout 3 and New Vegas, it's safe to say they succeeded. In the post-war era, Repkon's tech becomes a shrine, a trap, and a punchline. Because what happens after the war isn't that Repkon disappears. It's that Repkon's facilities become weird museums of what people wanted the future to be. Kind of like Fallout as a whole. You get the Bright Brotherhood occupying the Repkon test site, ghouls clinging to the dream of leaving Earth and finding somewhere better. That's tragic. Because Repkon's dream was always a corporate dream first. The future they promised was never meant for everyone. Or how the Brotherhood of Steel were sent there to recover technology, only to die a pointless death at the hands of a 200-year-old building simply being old and having random collapses. In addition, Repkon's brand legacy includes genuinely absurd details like tour souvenirs, glow-filled rocket replicas, except kids drank the liquid because they thought it was Nuka-Cola, simply because it glowed. The incidents gained notoriety to the point that newspapers called it the Repkon Shakes, and all of the remaining souvenirs were thrown out into a random nearby motel to sell alongside its little dinosaur toys. If that doesn't summarize pre-war consumer culture, I don't know what does. So, what happened to Repkon? They got swallowed by Robco before the bombs even fell. Then their facilities became dangerous monuments, still locked down, still crawling with security, still holding radioactive secrets, and still attracting people who think the future is hidden inside. That's the industrial side of the future that never was. But what if the next company proves the wasteland's moral rot didn't come from science labs or mines, but instead it came from entertainment? Yeah, let's talk about the company that sold heroism and propaganda in comic book form while the world burned. Hubris Comics, when propaganda wears a cape. Hubris Comics was a pre-war entertainment company founded in 2021, headquartered in Washington, D.C., and tied into a whole web of publishing divisions and spin-offs. You've likely heard or seen some of their properties. On paper, it's just comics. In practice, it's something dark darker, a factory that mass-produced comfort and propaganda in a collapsing society. Hubris made properties like Grognak the Barbarian, the Silver Shroud, Captain Cosmos, classic Fallout pulp icons. But in Fallout, even something as basic as entertainment isn't neutral. While the Mistress of Mystery gets a big-budget Hollywood actress to play her on TV, or the newest radio show The Silver Shroud has him fighting the Mechanist, people are starving in cities, fighting each other for scraps, or dying without getting to say goodbye to their families in a war thousands of miles away. So when the world is collapsing, entertainment becomes control. Hubris wasn't just selling stories. They were selling escapism at industrial scale. And not in the cute way like, hey, reading is fun. More in the, please don't look at the resource wars, look at the masked vigilante instead way. Captain Cosmos promoted truth, justice, and the Space American way. Grognak saluted to the troops, and their villains were over-the-top parodies of communism or otherwise anti-American thought, such as Dr. Brainwash and his robot decapitalists. But in the post-war era, hubris, much like its name implies, doesn't die. It haunts. Hubris is one of the clearest examples of a company surviving without surviving. Their buildings are ruins, sure, but their stories, their characters, their symbols, those get absorbed into the Wasteland's identity. The Silver Shroud becomes an actual persona that people adopt out of nostalgia and a desire for less complexity. Grognak becomes a legend scavvers still chase through merchandise and relics for. Hubris's content becomes cultural scrap metal. Even out in the Wasteland, you still find long-forgotten comics describing tales of good winning out over evil. People make pop culture references, likening situations in the Wasteland or more wild Wasteland scenarios to something they've seen, heard, or read about in a comic book. Some Wastelanders even get into arguments on what superhero would beat another superhero, or simply treating fictional stories not as fiction, but as reality. Even you gain buffs when you find these magazines either as temporary help or as permanent adjustments to your skills and abilities. Contrary to their characters, their stories forever locked at their last issue or their last episode, Hubris basically achieved immortality. Not as a company, as a myth-making machine that keeps influencing people long after the artists, writers, and executives are dust. There's a specific kind of Fallout humor here. Hubris made stories about heroes saving the day from communism, and then the day ended anyway. Maybe because of capitalism, maybe because of communism. It really doesn't matter at the end of the day. Hubris won out over both. Poisoning minds with stories, that's one thing. But what if the next company did something even more disgusting? What if they took childhood comfort and quietly turned it into a weapons contract? Wilson Atomatoys, turning childhood into landmines. Wilson Atomatoys is one of the most sinister companies in Fallout because their branding is pure innocence. Toys, collectibles, cute mascots. The most well-known of which is the Giddy-Up Buttercup. If you've played Mothership Zeta or Fallout 4, you already know that Horse is cursed. And we're not talking about the horsepower armor. That's not counting that, according to a Capital Post article in the Fallout TV show, the company was being sued over it. But it gets worse when you look at what the company was doing right before the bombs. Until October 21st of 2077, Wilson Atomatoys had an internal conflict. Its co-founder, Arlen Glass, was trying to convince leadership not to go down a certain path. Arlen was getting blocked by security, trying to save his company and himself, but was limited to basically watching the company slip into something darker. You already know what happens 2 days later. The war hits, and the company collapses. But what's important is what happened right before that collapse. The Psi-The program, the Wilson Atomatoys factory was being secretly converted into a production line for mines to aid the war effort after the company president made a deal with the Department of the Army as part of the Scythe program. Turns out the same lines that make Giddy-Up Buttercups are also really good for making landmines. 3 of the 5 production lines had already been converted 2 days before the Great War, with full-scale mine production scheduled for November 1st, 2077. So Wilson Atomatoys was literally in the process of transforming a toy factory into a landmine factory. That is evil in the most nauseating way possible. It's not even the mines alone. It's the betrayal of purpose. It's taking the machinery of childhood and repurposing it for mutilation. Why, exactly? Because profits had taken a slight dip, allegedly at least, but it was enough to make the other co-founder's son and current CEO, Mark Wilson, heavily reconsider. It's like some people in the pre-war world looked at children and said that it wasn't enough to bring joy to kids. No, they have to make bombs for the army as well. Arlen was left to die, while Mark was simply given a simple warning to get to shelter. Arlen survived, Mark did not. Since the war, Brian Nuss, the factory had been taken over by super mutants, and Wilson's corporate HQ becomes a super mutant base as well, as it had been left abandoned for years before mutants stormed it and used it for raiding. So, what happened to Wilson Automatoys? They died with the old world, but the physical remnants became fortresses for monsters, which is, again, painfully on the mark. Get it? A company that helped build tools for war ends up becoming a shelter for things that shouldn't exist. At the very least, you can help a ghoulified Arlen find some hope and joy in the world. Okay, that one was bleak. So let's pivot to something lighter, right? A drink company, a soft drink brand. Surely that's harmless. No, it's Fallout. Let's talk about Sunset Sarsaparilla, the company that accidentally created many deadly wasteland treasure hunts out of marketing. Sunset Sarsaparilla, the legend that outlived its makers. The Sunset Sarsaparilla Company was a pre-war soft drink manufacturer, headquartered in Las Vegas and famous especially in the American Southwest for its pride and joy, Sunset Sarsaparilla. Now, the company itself is already interesting because it's not evil in the same way as West Tech or AMS. Sunset is subtler. Their evil is unintentional, the kind that creeps in through consumer culture, through manipulation, branding, and the way a corporation can shape behavior without a gun. That is, until a gun is used to get something the corporation promoted. The Legend of the Star. Before the war, there was a promotional story about Sunset bottle caps marked with a star. Collect them, bring them to headquarters, and you get a prize. Nobody knows how it started, but it was more than enough to make the company shift into cowboy and Wild West marketing. They purchased robots from Robco, automated deliveries, and put production on double time. Then the Great War happened, and the story was warped into a legend. The robot mascot Festus kept it alive, and after the war, the simple prize became a bloated tale of technology caches and incredible loot. Malcolm Holmes follows you on the very first time you pick one up to not just reminisce, but warn you, and you see at least two instances of this madness, once with the friendly but naive Thomas and the fiercely competitive Jacqueline, and again with the man who won the contest at the cost of his life, Alan Marks. So what happened? A corporation created a gimmick. The apocalypse turned it into folklore, and now you've got Wastelanders obsessively chasing star caps like it's a holy quest. Which is funny, but also disturbing, because it shows you something Fallout loves to underline. People don't stop being human after the end. They still chase hope. They still chase stories. They still chase rewards. And corporations train them to do it. Post-war, the company dies, but the product lives. Supplies of Sunset Sarsaparilla remain in the Mojave, delivered to vending machines by robots, and even outside of Vegas, as seen in Season 2 of the TV show. And the drink stays popular long after the company itself ceases to exist. It's drunk in California, Nevada, and even as far as Appalachia. But the brand survives, because the wasteland still runs on scarcity, nostalgia, and myth. And maybe that's the creepiest kind of corporate immortality, when your product outlives your civilization. But hey, at least you get the taste of sarsaparilla to wash out all of those awful moral and ethical violations. So what really happened to all these companies? Well, here's the through line nobody likes admitting. Most of these companies didn't get punished. They didn't get defeated. They didn't get dragged into court or dismantled by some heroic movement. The world ended, and they simply stopped filing taxes. So if you ever wonder why Fallout feels so bleak, it's because the horror isn't just radiation or raiders. It's that the apocalypse didn't erase the old world. It just made the old world honest by bringing their atrocities to light, or at least leaving the door open for explorers to discover decades or centuries later. And yet, for the most evil companies in Fallout, they didn't need to survive. Their choices did. That's it. But what they left behind, the labs, mines, facilities, robots, chemicals, propaganda, everything, it didn't vanish. It became the Wasteland's inheritance. Today, I'm breaking down every single one of the most disturbing mysteries from the Fallout franchise and everything we know about them, starting with a very creepy one that nobody wants to talk about. On the day the world ended, imagine if your boss demanded overtime, permanent overtime. The doors are locked for a reason. Have you ever had a job where you could feel the building turn against you? Like the place isn't just a workplace. It's not a family business, it's not a mom and pop store, it's cold, it's empty, it's corporate. But more importantly, it's a trap, or at least it turns into one, all because they needed just a little more time. That's Cambridge Polymer Labs. And what makes it disturbing isn't that things went wrong, it's that even in its final moments, the place still behaved like a company, still follows protocol, still treats human beings like they're replaceable parts in a process. Cogs in a machine aren't enough to describe how soulless and hollow the company felt once the bombs dropped, but that's where the mystery starts. Because the story Cambridge Polymer Labs tells you is not clean. It's not one villain in a lab coat. It's a chain of decisions. And chains are harder to break than villains. But what exactly was CPL? Well, Cambridge Polymer Labs was a pre-war research facility, working with military contracts, experimental smart materials and robotics of a field of science few had ever heard or worked in, nucleostrictive and piezoelectric polymers. Once the military caught on, that was all the facility could be built around, a deliverable, something they promised to produce, even if it was ultimately impossible. When you enter the place in Fallout 4, the vibe is immediate. This isn't a ruin you can loot. Well, you could, but you at least should pay some respect to the dead, or at least learn the story before you pick the place clean. But back to the point, this is a place that still feels like it expects employees to show up. There are rules, checkpoints. There's a sense that somebody, at some point, decided no one leaves until the work is done. And here's the big question. Was the lockdown a panicked reaction to the bombs, or was it the facility doing exactly what it was designed to do? Because those are two very different horrors. One is people losing their minds, the other is a system functioning perfectly, as designed, as intended. And it's not hard to imagine the order of events. Just picture it. The first alerts come in. People are whispering about the end of the world, how it might have just happened during a stressful period at the office. Phones are giving dial tones. Radios are spitting out gibberish instead of songs and news. Supervisors walking faster than normal. Something has happened. Something big, something bad. But then the radio clears the static for a brief minute. The broadcast comes through crystal clear. There's been nuclear strikes. Civil defense efforts have ended in failure. There's no time left. The end of the world is here. And in a normal and sane world, that's the moment everyone runs. But in the world of Fallout, more specifically, a place like Cambridge Polymer Labs, that's the moment leadership does something that only feels logical on paper. They lock the doors, they go into containment, they prioritize the project. Because the project is what justifies the building. The project is what justifies the contract. The project is what justifies everything, because the project is tied to national defense, the government, the same one who funded the operation for so long, the ones who the company wouldn't exist without. Then suddenly, human lives become secondary, not because people are monsters, but because systems turn people into numbers. Now, what makes the Cambridge Polymer situation feel so sinister is how it seems to spiral, not just into chaos, but into a kind of controlled chaos, like a facility trying to maintain order with brute force, security measures, containment policies, escalation. And as the situation falls apart inside, the story starts to look like a blueprint for an internal disaster, as if the one outside couldn't get any worse. People trapped inside a sealed environment, arguments about what to do, accusations. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Both to the video game and real life. But then you get the question that always appears in places like this. Who's trying to get out, and who's trying to keep them in? Because once a building becomes a prison, everyone inside becomes a suspect. And if you've ever worked in any corporate environment, you know, the most terrifying part is this. A lot of people will obey a badge and a rule even when it's clearly wrong. They'll tell themselves it's for safety, that it's temporary, that it's above their pay grade. Complacency in compliance. Abiding to the system because it's all they have left when the world ends. That's what Cambridge Polymer Labs feels like. A place where policy becomes violence. And there's another layer here that makes it worse. The lab wasn't just a place that made just plain old anything. It was a place that made objects, military objects, which means it's the kind of place that could justify anything. If the work was important enough, you could lock down the facility, suspend labor laws, what little there was left in the America of 2077, at least. Delay evacuations of the facility, you could call it patriotism. Patriotic it was not. So here's the disturbing thing. What was the priority order inside that building when the bombs fell? Because if the top priority was to protect the public, then you evacuate. If the top priority was to protect the research, you lock down. And Cambridge Polymer Labs looks like a place that is locked down. For what, exactly? Ironically enough, nothing more than a set of shinied up armor, all because it wasn't ready in time for a military demonstration. Now, let's talk about the emotional core of this. Because the Commonwealth is filled with raiders and monsters, but raiders don't scare you the same way this should. Plenty of raiders are chaotic. What happened at the CPL was structure. This was a workplace turning into a controlled environment where people start treating each other as obstacles. And that's the most believable horror Fallout 4 ever tells. Because it's not fantasy, it's a system. Now, here's the implication that ties into the bigger mystery. If Cambridge Polymer Labs locked itself down because of policy, then it suggests pre-war America had places that were designed to become sealed boxes during the apocalypse. not to save the workers, but to protect the assets. And if you've played Fallout 3 or New Vegas, Cambridge Polymer Labs isn't an isolated tragedy. It's a preview of what would ultimately lead Vault-Tec to study and perfect the Vault mentality, a building built around the assumption of the idea that we can always keep control if we just close the doors. And that brings us to the next file, because this next disturbing mystery may require a moment to let things sink in. This isn't a mere workplace shutdown, it's about something worse. A project, more specifically, a disease, and a detail so specific you can't ignore it. Because even if it's not listed in the game itself, the official material, the Fallout 4 game guide, mentions a virus. And it doesn't target soldiers, it targets kids. Once you hear that, you'll never look at pre-war medical research the same way again. Why was this never written down? Alright, let me start this one carefully, because it's dark. Much darker than Cambridge. MedTech research is one of those Fallout locations that feels like it's full of implications. Not just loot, not just enemies. Implications. These are the guys who brought you Fixer mentats of all flavors, infirmaries, automatic doctors, but those products we won't be focusing on here. The big mystery comes from official non-game material, the kind of text that, on first read, can be hand-waved as summarizing a location and moving on. But the Fallout 4 developers who wrote it dropped a detail that basically screams that something horrifying happened here. The detail is this: a virus, and not just any virus. A virus that specifically affected teenagers and children. Now, stop there, because that's the moment your brain should go, why would that exist? How could it exist? Why does it exist? What is the scenario where a corporation is researching a virus with that kind of targeting? There are a few possibilities. None of them are comforting. Maybe it was a genuine medical pursuit. They made Fixer and were working on Prevent. Maybe they were working on a cure to this virus as well. Perhaps there was a treatment being developed. Or if there was nothing else they could do, they might have performed containment studies. But Fallout's pre-war world rarely gives you clean charity. Fixer was a temporary fix at best, and Prevent was to be sold at price hike rates that even real-world drug companies could only dream of. So the other possibilities hover in the background like a shadow. You know the usual ones: weaponization, population control, behavioral science, optimization. And that's the mystery. Fallout 4 doesn't tell you the purpose directly. It leaves you with the implication. And the implication is horrifying. Because even if it began as medical research, it's still a world where megacorporations profit off suffering. Good thing that sort of thing never happens in real life. And MedTech as a name already sounds like one of those companies that makes its money from manufactured repeat customers and addictions to products that are supposed to help, not hurt. Compassion is a word they only know because they have to have something to tell their employees to justify the awful things they did, or telling the families of those harmed that they care, even if they really don't. Now, let's build the case. MedTech is the kind of place that, on the surface, looks like any other research facility. Sterile, clinical, professional. But the Commonwealth, along with many other regions of post-war America, is built on ruins of professionalism. Thankfully, the ruins tend to reveal what people really did when no one was watching. In Fallout, what may first appear to be nothing more than a humble medical research facility is very rarely just that. It's usually a place where ethics were negotiated down until they disappeared. So here's the core question. Who were the test subjects? Because you don't research a teen-child virus without encountering teens and children in the equation. That alone is enough to make the story feel sick. And here's the disturbing thing about Fallout's world building. It often suggests, if not outright states, the pre-war America had the ability to do things quietly, bury things, classify things. And if MedTech was researching something like this, it implies there was a chain of approval, but more dreadful than that, a demand. Somebody signed off on it. Somebody funded it. Somebody decided it was worth doing. And it brings us back to the paperwork horror theme. When a monster reveals itself to you, you know it's evil. When a committee approves your suffering without your consent, without your knowledge, it's worse. Now, there's another piece to this. The facility, much like most facilities across the franchise, locks down when the bombs fall, and the lockdown is never lifted. That line is chilling, because it implies the place stayed sealed, not as a refuge, but as a tomb. Only substitute mummies and pharaohs for everyday workers and scientists. And in a world where people would break into anything for resources, the fact that it's framed as never lifted suggests either 1. No one could safely access it, 2. No one wanted to, or 3. Someone preferred it remain closed forever. That third possibility is the most disturbing of all, simply because in the world of Fallout, not only is that often the case, but any sane reaction is played off as irrational, while the most irrational decisions are deemed standard. The lockdown being placed upon MedTech research implies that the knowledge inside is not not lost. It's contained. Now, why would you contain something? Because it's dangerous. Not just physically, politically, morally. If it got out that a company was researching something targeting children, even pre-war America would have to handle the optics. Just look at how the new plague was handled. Fallout is obsessed with optics. Everything is branding, safe, and non-threatening. Everything is made with the mindset of giving the illusion that they care about you. So, you lock the facility to prevent harsh, cold reality from getting out. Lock the doors and throw away the key, and should the end of the world happen to occur that day, you simply let the bombs erase the witnesses. Then you hope history never digs it up. But history does dig it up, because what's hidden in the dark is always brought to the light sooner or later. Now, I'm not saying the game gives us every detail, it most certainly doesn't, but that's why it's a mystery. Evidence is a breadcrumb. Breadcrumbs become trails, and trails always lead to somewhere. It could take you in circles, back to where you started, or exactly what you were looking for the whole time. And here, it's the lack of explanation that becomes the story. So here's the bigger implication. MedTech is just one of the many horrors in the pre-war era that weren't just Vault-Tec doing experiments, they were part of a larger ecosystem, corporate science, military contracts, classified projects, a world that was already sick before the radiation. And if the pre-war world was already okay with this, then the Commonwealth isn't a fall from grace. It's a continuation. A fall from grace doesn't begin to describe the levels of depravity this kind of thing would bring upon not just the company, but the society it was part of. Now, here's something to chew on. If MedTech is about hidden research, then let's take it a step further. Go beyond research, or rather, conduct hidden research via a hidden replacement, because the Institute takes the idea of quiet evil and perfects it. And the most disturbing part? It isn't the killing, it's what comes after. A family keeps eating dinner with something who looks like their father but isn't. The Warwick replacement. Let's talk about something Fallout 4 does better than almost any other Fallout game. Paranoia. The past games certainly have their moments of feeling like someone is watching you, but the Commonwealth takes it not just a step further, but leaps beyond. Fallout 4's towns and settlements are not just built on a fear that someone you know isn't who they say they are. They were built, destroyed, and only continue to exist because of it. Most of the time, that fear feels like rumor, mere superstition, like people trying to explain chaos, until you hit Warwick Homestead. What first comes off as a humble farm, of which Fallout 4 has many, turns out to be where many players find out that the rumor isn't just rumor, it's reality. Because in this case, the game doesn't just imply replacement, it documents it, and that creates the mystery. There's no question of if it happened, because we know it happened. The mystery is, how many times did it happen when we weren't looking? Warwick feels like the one case that slipped through the cracks. Perhaps it was an intentional slip-up by the developers, or by the Institute themselves. The one case where the paperwork still exists because the Institute hasn't finished their research. They can't burn and hide everything when there is still so much left to learn and do in this experiment. And unlike Raiders, they're one group who isn't going burn, baby, burn. They sweep in within the dead of night, kill everyone, and leave like they were never there. But Warwick isn't the only one documented case. There are dozens of undocumented ones. What makes Warwick uniquely disturbing is how unassuming, civilian, how benign it is. It's not a battlefield infiltration, as they do with Dance. It's not a military target. It's a farm, a farmer and his family, a daily life. And the Institute looks at that and sees not just crops, but ripe ground to perform an experiment. They replace Roger Warwick and use him as a living sensor inside a family unit. That alone is horrifying. But the part that really stings is the purpose. It's not just espionage. They picked the homestead for a reason. It's agricultural research. They want data. They want long-term observation. They want to measure the effects of their modified crops. What kind of crops? Gourds. Genetically modified gourds, but indistinguishable from everyday gourds. So to get the best results, they take away a human being's life. They take him out of the world, and they put a replica in his place. The replica certainly isn't as abusive or mean as the human version was, but it's not him. It's a hollow shell. It's simply another tool of the Institute. Now, from a pure evil logic perspective, you can see why it's efficient, but that's what makes it disturbing, because it's not a raider doing something impulsive for necessity or sadism. It's a lab doing something calculated, not just before the war, but after. And now it's experiments that to many people make no sense. MedTech working with a virus is understandable for a medical company, but the Institute is growing crops, then plans to burn away all evidence. It's the same kind of nonsensical logic Cambridge Polymer Labs and MedTech research were following, just updated, more advanced, quieter. Now, let's dig into human horror, where this will all start to make a much more sense momentarily. A synth replacement isn't just a corpse, it's a mask, a performance. As Cooper Howard would say, it seems more like an Amish production of The Count of Monte Cristo, that the family is living inside inside a lie orchestrated not just by a man parading around as their father, but a clinical and sterile facility of alleged geniuses who, instead of truly attempting to benefit or help the world, instead see fit to repeat endless cycles of tests, watching, notating, and destroying. Every conversation is contaminated, because you don't know when Roger was replaced, and the Institute isn't telling. Every memory becomes suspect. The Warwick family doesn't even get the dignity of knowing the truth at first. They don't get closure, not in a healthy or safe way. It took an outsider that came to the farm just before the game started, heavily paranoid of synths, to even begin getting the family to ask questions. The family, the friends, everyone gets manipulated by the Institute's ploy. And if you're the spouse or the kid, you're emotionally bonded, no longer to a human being, but instead to a thing that was built to collect data. You think your husband or father might have changed a bit, but you have no clue, no idea, that it's now a machine that has his memories, has his face, but is no longer him. That's not just murder. That's identity theft at a spiritual level. And ironically enough, the man who questions Roger to be a synth wants him murdered as well. As the old saying goes, an eye for an eye drives the whole world blind. To the Commonwealth, the only way to solve the murder of a friend or loved one is to kill the thing that replaced them. But it also means they're paranoid enough to kill flesh and blood humans simply because they think they're a robot. Now here's the mystery angle to this story. Warwick Homestead is one of the few stories where the game gives you the operational outline. The Institute lays it all out on the table. You can infer a process. And when you can infer a process, you can infer scale, identify targets, abduct, extract information, build a replica, insert replica, finally monitor until complete, then incinerate and destroy. That's a pipeline. And as Fallout 4 shows over and over again, pipelines aren't built for one unit or one routine. Pipelines are built to run. Warwick was simply one of the many demented tests the Institute was running, had forgotten about, or simply performed just to see if it was capable of performing it. It's where the Institute becomes so terrifying, because they're not raiders. They're not a cult, at least not one defined by religion. They instigate fear in how emotionless they are. They don't burn. They don't declare victory. They simply edit reality. And if reality can't be edited, they make it so it can be edited. They change one person, then another, and create processes and pipelines to satisfy a goal, be it arbitrary or highly impactful. Then they watch the world ripple. They can do it once. They can do it 1,000 or more times, with no recourse, no remorse. Warwick shows you the post-war version of science without consent, progress without ethics, experimentation without point. It's the same ethical disease as medtech, the same as Cambridge, just evolved. Some could even call it devolved. Doesn't that remind you of someone? Or rather, something? The Institute's field experiments are basically vault experiments without vault tech branding. They turn the surface into a lab or a field experimentation site. They turn people into variables, and they never ask permission. Now, bear with me here, because as bad as replacement is, it still leaves you at least recognizably human. The world still treats you as a person-shaped object, which, let's be honest, they're not saying that about ghouls or super mutants. There are definitely worse fates out there, like what we'll look at next, because what you're about to witness takes people and turns them into equipment, not unlike the Institute and their synths. It's not a metaphor, it's literal. Brains in jars, bodies on gurneys, and a military label sealing their stamp of not only approval, but effectively an order. Prisoners go in. Machines come out. Okay, now we're getting into some of the heavy hitters. Automatron. If you've played the DLC, you probably remember the vibe. Robots everywhere, chaos on the roads, and this creeping realization that the Commonwealth's robot problem isn't new. The robo-brains might be, but a lot isn't. It's ancient. After all, robotics were baked into the pre-war world. But while we know where some of those machines came from, others we don't, like the robo-brain. Somewhere along the way, the line between robot and person got erased. The Mechanist's Lair, formerly known as Robotics Technology Facility RB2851, gives you a plethora of lore that is genuinely one of the most disturbing things Fallout has ever done. It continues a legacy of facilities that acted like a prison and treated inmates like a resource. Not people, but a resource. Something to be produced, transformed, exploited, harvested. The pipeline is simple. Prisoners go in, brains come out, robo-brains roll out. Now you might think, yeah, that's Fallout. It's dark, but sit with it for a moment. The robo-brain isn't just an ordinary Protectron, a servile Mr. Handy, or a war-focused Assaultron. The robo-brain's concept is uniquely horrifying in a way that's easy to miss. A normal robot is a machine, right? Well, depending on which one you meet, any robo-brain is a person trapped inside a machine. That means every robo-brain you fight is not just a hostile unit, a machine with bad programming, or having gone haywire after 200 years without maintenance. It's the aftermath of not only a medical atrocity, but an ethical and moral one. It's a mind that was stolen, altered, and locked into a chassis. Sometimes the prisoners are stripped of their memory, flushed away like a dead goldfish down a toilet. Sometimes they're scrambled, unable to recall who they are or what they were before they became conscious. Sometimes the mind simply is too smart and needs to be reduced to fragments of instinct to create the perfect killing machine. And the worst part? This wasn't done by some post-war entity like the Institute. This was done by institutions, specifically the U.S. Army, a group that pre-war citizens trusted to keep them safe and free. The U.S. Army worked with Robco and General Atomics to not just fund, but expand existing facilities with massive production and research capabilities. Facilities manned with immoral and apathetic staff, with procedures that robbed not just those it attacked, but those who worked there, of what little humanity they had remaining, with predictive and routine maintenance schedules, with compliance checklists to ensure everything was operating as intended. Again, paperwork horror. Now, here's the mystery. How widespread was this? There are a few clues to answer that. First, RoboBrains appear in multiple places across the broader Fallout universe, from the very first game to the most recent game. That suggests production, distribution, and deployment. Secondly, if a facility is set up like a prison and a processing center, it implies long-term planning. Obviously, you don't build a pipeline for 1 or 2 brains. You build it for volume, mass production. And thirdly, the pre-war world of Fallout had a genuine obsession with solving human problems with machines. Police robots, security robots, military robots. And the RoboBrain is the darkest expression of that obsession, because it says that, from the perspective of the military, human beings are flawed. They would much rather keep the brain and throw away the body. They would instead try to keep the intelligence and processing power of the human brain and remove the freedom and those pesky ethics and morals. Now, let's get specific about why it's disturbing. Prisoners, at least in the Fallout universe, are already a group that suffers more than necessary. Some are people who were falsely accused, thrown in prison because they looked Chinese or dared to question the government. They already have reduced rights as is. And in a corrupt, collapsing America, it's very easy to imagine somebody further reducing their humanity in the belief that they're nothing more than criminals. They're expendable, no one will miss them. That's how atrocities happen. Not with demons, but with rationalizations. Once you can rationalize it for prisoners, you can rationalize it for anyone. That's the nightmare. Now, here's the deeper mystery. If you can turn prisoners into RoboBrains, then the RoboBrain program becomes a quiet weapon for not just military command and combat, but also social control. You remove whoever could be considered undesirable. You convert them into useful assets. You deploy them as law enforcement, labor, or military support, and you call it efficiency. That's the kind of horror Fallout's pre-war world loved. And if you want to push it further, you can definitely know that prisoners were not the only source. Because if the pipeline exists, it creates demand, and demand leads to expansion. Now, the game explicitly shows only the most horrifying and immoral steps. It doesn't lay out every single detail for us to follow, but the implication is heavy, because any system that can accept prisoners can also accept removing the justice element and move to the dissidents without even bothering to go through any kind of legal process. Political dissidents, homeless people, unproductive citizens, captured enemies, anyone you can classify and disappear without fear of recourse or question. And in Fallout's America, classification may as well have been a national sport. Now, the biggest mystery element is this. RoboBrains exist post-war, functioning just as well as they did when they were created, even if insane and hostile. So, someone designed the tech to survive long after they deployed it, even after society collapsed, and even more than 200 years later. Which raises the question, who kept these systems alive? Was it fully automated? RoboBrains creating more RoboBrains? Was it military continuity? Enclave remnants turning wastelanders into more killing machines? Or was it just inertia? Machines continuing to do what they were designed to do because nobody ever turned them off. That's the scariest kind of horror, a process without a human driver. A system that keeps eating people long after the original planners are dust. But after all of this, after all this corporate institutional horror, here's a shift of gears. It's still disturbing, yet in a different way. Because the last mystery isn't about a lab, or a contract, or a pipeline. It's about faith, and the possibility that the most powerful force on Far Harbor isn't a monster. It's a story that guides people into the fog, a miracle that might be real, and still can be very dangerous. The mother of the fog. Far Harbor is already unsettling. The fog, radioactive and shrouding most of the land in secrecy, makes it feel like the island is breathing. The coastline and forests feel like they're watching you. Every group out there is holding on to some story just to stay sane. whether they want the fog to flood the island or to drive it back. But nothing on the island is as quietly disturbing as the mother of the fog, a local Children of Atom superstition, because she's not a monster you can shoot. She's not a raider you can try to negotiate with. She's more like an idea-made reality, a figure, a presence, and she sits right at the intersection of religion and survival, which means she has power. Now, here's the mystery. The Children of Atom treat the mother of the fog like a kind of saint, as should anyone who meets her. They are considered truly blessed by their holy figure, Atom. She's considered something of a messenger, and when you meet her for yourself, she acts a lot like a guide, someone who appears at key moments and steers the faithful. But the game leaves room for doubt. Some people interpret her as a literal supernatural presence. Others think she might be a human hermit, an old woman surviving in the fog that gained religious significance. The game gives possibilities for both, that there's some entity and that there's an ordinary person. And you might think that makes the mystery less disturbing, but no, that's what makes it all the more intriguing. Because if she's a person, it means something terrifying. A human being can become a miracle if conditions are right. Not just talk of religious figures, but becoming one in real life due to your abilities. And Far Harbor has perfect conditions. The fog is disorienting. The island itself is very deadly. People are scared. They're exhausted. They're looking for meaning. So when someone or something appears in the fog at the right time, it feels divine. It feels like whatever deity you pray to has sent something to help you, or something to take you to your final resting place. Once it feels divine, you stop questioning it. Now here's the key point. Whether she's supernatural or human, she functions the same way. She guides people. She validates the beliefs of both those who do believe in her and those who do not. She acts as a living sign that says that the fog is not random, that the fog has a purpose. And that kind of belief can reshape an entire community. The existence of the Fog Mother comes as a sign to some as a key figure of the idea of turning survival into destiny. Now, let's zoom in on why this is disturbing. The primary religion that worships her, the Children of Atom, is not just a religion. They're an ideology built around radiation. Every sect is different, but this group is particularly militant. They interpret pain as purification. They interpret exposure as a blessing. Now at Far Harbor, where the fog literally kills people, that belief can become a weapon, not against enemies, against their own instincts, against their own self-preservation. So when the mother of the fog appears, she becomes a reinforcement mechanism, a proof, a holy stamp, a sign from Atom that what they are doing is right. Herein lies the question. Is she intentionally steering people into danger? Or, if she's supernatural, then what is she? A benevolent guide? Or a force that wants something? If she's human, then is she complicit with the Children of Atom? Is she manipulating their faith and the faith of others? Or is she sincerely trying to help? Both options are deeply unsettling. Now, there's a detail I always come back to with this. In a place like the island, people can mistake coincidence for design. They can mistake survival for divine favor. And once that happens, the story becomes self-sustaining. People will seek the miracle, they will interpret anything as a sign, they will build doctrine around it, and if you are the miracle, you can steer them, even if you never meant to. So the Mother of the Fog becomes the perfect final disturbing mystery. She demonstrates the most subtle horror in the entire DLC. Not all control is mechanical. Not all control is corporate. Sometimes control is spiritual. Sometimes it's narrative. Sometimes it's a myth that walks through the fog and points you in a direction. And that leads us to the conclusion. Because when you lay all of these mysteries from Fallout 4 on the table, you see the same shape, the same patterns and cycles repeating over and over. Locked doors for the sake of a petty project. Controlled populations being defined by a virus that infects the youngest of us. Human beings are reduced to an input, driving everyone else mad in their paranoia. A system that treats people as expendable. A religious figure being used to help or harm a population. And the most horrifying part? Some of these systems are still running, whether it's continuations of pre-war entities, like corporations such as Vault-Tec or the government that permitted these to begin with, like the Enclave. A main theme of Fallout is that war never changes, but people do. And at the end of the day, it's not gore that horrifies people the most. It's not the monsters, the death claws, and feral ghouls. It's not even the apocalypse. It's the fact that the apocalypse didn't create the horror. It simply revealed it. Cambridge Polymer Labs shows you the corporate instinct to trap people for results. A building that treats workers like resources at the very moment the world ends, in service for nothing more than money. MedTech suggests research so ethically radioactive that the safest option was to seal it and pretend it never happened. Warwick proves the Institute will erase a person and replace them just to watch a farm grow slightly better crops. Automatron's robo Brain pipeline shows the ultimate industrial cruelty. People turned into machinery because it's efficient. And Far Harbor shows a different kind of control. Not a lab, not a contract, a miracle. A story that can steer people into death with a gentle hand. The Commonwealth isn't terrifying because it has monsters. It's terrifying because it has systems, and some of them never shut down. So, the next time you walk into a suspiciously clean hallway, or you read a terminal entry that sounds professional but clearly uses coded language, or you hear someone say, "It's for the greater good," just remember, in Fallout, that's usually the line someone says right before they decide you're acceptable to loot. Today, I'm explaining the most disturbing mysteries that haunt the Fallout universe, and the secret nobody tells you about these mysteries. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why the Wasteland's real nightmare isn't radiation or mutants. It's what humanity chose to become before the bombs even fell, starting with the corporation that made nuclear annihilation look merciful, Vault Experiments. The company built 122 vaults before the bombs dropped, and only 17 were actual control vaults meant to function normally. The other 105 were psychological and biological experiments disguised as shelters, all feeding data back to the Enclave for some twisted plan involving space colonization. Families walked into these vaults thinking they'd found safety, and instead became lab rats in experiments that would make Nazi scientists uncomfortable. Vault 11 forced residents to elect someone to die every year, creating a society built on betrayal and paranoia that ended with the survivors choosing mass suicide over continuing. Vault 92 pumped white noise into the air to test subliminal messaging for super soldier programs, driving everyone violently insane. Vault 106 released psychoactive drugs through the ventilation system, causing residents to hallucinate until they murdered each other in fits of paranoid delusion. And Vault 75 told parents their children would get the best education possible, then killed all the adults and harvested the kids for genetic material. These weren't accidents or malfunctions. Every horrific detail was planned, documented, and monitored by people who got paid to imagine new ways to torture entire communities. The scary part is how normal everything looked on the surface. These vaults had schools, apartments, and community spaces, all while running experiments that would violate every ethical standard ever written. Vault-Tec turned the apocalypse into a business opportunity and made the Wasteland seem like a better option than their shelters. And here's the part that'll mess with your head. Every Vault experiment was designed with a specific goal, testing human behavior under extreme stress. But Vault 11's suicide pact wasn't the variable they were testing. It was the desired outcome. The experiment was never about sacrifice. It was about whether humans would choose extinction over moral compromise. That terminal entry that says, "Congratulations, you're free to go," after everyone's dead, that was always the end goal. Vault-Tec wanted to know if people would rather die than keep killing. They got their answer, and they documented it for someone. But if corporate evil seems bad, wait until you see what their scientists created in the labs. FEV Horror. The forced evolutionary virus started as a cure for disease and became the Wasteland's worst nightmare. This green liquid doesn't just mutate you, it rewrites your DNA while you're conscious enough to feel every agonizing second. Pre-war scientists at West Tech developed FEV from something called the pan-immunity virion, originally meant to cure the new plague that was killing millions. Instead, they created a bioweapon that could transform humans into super soldiers, because apparently solving a plague wasn't profitable enough. After the bombs dropped, a scientist named Richard Gray found the FEV research and decided to use it to create a master race of super mutants, because he thought regular humans were too flawed to survive. His process involved dunking people into vats of FEV, and the survival rate was about 20%, meaning 8 out of 10 people died screaming as their bodies rejected the transformation. The ones who survived grew to over 10 feet tall, gained massive strength and immunity to radiation, but lost their ability to reproduce and often their intelligence. Gray's own diary describes the mutations as feeling like your bones are breaking and reforming while your skin stretches and tears. And he did this to thousands of people while calling it salvation. The virus has different strains too. Vault 87's aerosolized version created aggressive feral mutants who never stop growing. Huntersville's water contamination produced the green-skinned variants we see everywhere, and the Enclave even modified it into Curling 13, a toxin designed to kill every mutated creature in the Wasteland. The Master's experiments alone created an army of super mutants that waged war on the Wasteland for decades, and communities are still dealing with the FEV threat 2 centuries later. What makes FEV be truly disturbing, the virus literally rewrites what it means to be human at a genetic level. This was deliberate biological warfare that turned thousands of people into monsters against their will. And somewhere in the wasteland, there's probably still vats of this stuff waiting to be found. But the real question nobody asks is why the pre-war government funded FEV development at all. The new plague cure story is the official record, but West Tech's classified files tell a different story. They were developing FEV before the plague even started, before they had a disease to cure. The timeline doesn't match, which means someone knew a plague was coming, or they created the plague to justify developing FEV. Either way, the virus that turned thousands into monsters was always the plan, never the accident. And the master? He found their work and finished what they started. He wasn't a mad scientist who went rogue. He was following the blueprint they left behind. Though FEV created monsters from people, the next mystery trapped people inside monsters. Robo-brains? Imagine your brain getting removed and stuffed into a robot chassis, except you stay conscious the whole time. That's exactly what robo-brains are, and the process is even worse than it sounds. These mechanical nightmares were developed by General Atomics and the US military as multi-purpose robots for both civilian and combat roles. The original prototypes used chimpanzee brains, but apparently that wasn't horrifying enough, so they switched to using human brains harvested from criminals and prisoners. The process involved removing your brain while you were alive, preserving it in a nutrient solution, then wiring it directly into a tracked robotic body with manipulator arms and built-in weapons. You'd think they'd wipe the brain's personality to avoid issues, but no. Many robo-brains retain fragments of their original consciousness, leading to machines that beg for death or scream about remembering their families. Terminals in facilities like the Sierra Depot describe workers who recognized the voices of prisoners they'd processed, realizing these robots were still people trapped in metal bodies. The brains can last for centuries in their preservation fluid, meaning some robo-brains have been conscious and trapped for over 200 years since the bombs fell. They were used in various vault experiments too, with some facilities employing them as security or maintenance units, completely ignoring the ethical nightmare of using enslaved human consciousness as cheap labor. What really messes you up is hearing their combat dialogue. Some robo-brains say things like, "I'm not programmed to fail," in a way that suggests they're desperately clinging to their programming because acknowledging what they've become would break them completely. This isn't artificial intelligence or machine consciousness. It's actual human beings imprisoned in robot bodies, fully aware of what was done to them. The technology exists in the Fallout universe to transfer consciousness into machines, which raises terrifying questions about identity and what counts as being alive. General Atomics created a fate worse than death, and mass-produced it as a commercial product. The Automatron DLC reveals something even darker, though. The Mechanist's production notes describe robo-brain units that retain full cognitive function and memory. These aren't fragments of consciousness. These are complete people, aware of every second of their imprisonment. And get this, the longer a brain stays in the chassis, the more it adapts. Some units have been operating for so long they've developed new neural pathways. They're evolving past human consciousness while trapped in mechanical bodies. The question isn't whether they're still human, it's whether they're becoming something else entirely. Something that remembers being human and hates us for what we did. And people wonder why the robots in Fallout are so aggressive. Speaking of nightmares disguised as technology, let's talk about the virtual reality hell that trapped an entire neighborhood, Tranquility Lane. Virtual reality sounds fun until you're trapped in a 1950s simulation run by a sadistic scientist who's kept you imprisoned for 200 years. Tranquility Lane proves that sometimes the real monsters wear white coats. Dr. Stanislaus Brown created a life support system called the Tranquility Lounger that could sustain human bodies indefinitely while their minds lived in a virtual world. He convinced Vault 112's residents this was paradise, eternal life in a perfect simulation of pre-war America, and they volunteered to be permanently plugged in. What they didn't know was that Braun also uploaded himself as the simulation's administrator with godlike powers and zero oversight. He can't die, can't leave, and apparently can't stop torturing the same dozen people for 2 centuries. The simulation runs on a loop where Braun forces the residents to play out his sick fantasies, usually involving elaborate ways to make them hurt each other. He makes a woman's husband beat her to death, forces a little girl to watch her dog get killed repeatedly, and resets everyone's memories so they don't remember but still carry the psychological trauma. When you finally enter the simulation in Fallout 3, you find these people have been suffering in this nightmare suburb since 2077, locked in an eternal hell while their real bodies rot in loungers. Braun appears as a little girl named Betty to add extra creepiness, using a child avatar to orchestrate domestic horror. The worst part is, you can't free them unless you kill their physical bodies or navigate Braun's failsafe system, and even then he's still in there, alone with his madness for eternity. Virtual immortality turned into the longest-running torture session in human history. Braun had the power to create heaven and chose to build hell instead. This is what happens when you give someone infinite power with zero accountability. They spend 200 years inventing new ways to hurt the only people they have left. Tranquility Lane isn't just disturbing because of what Braun did, it's disturbing because he's still doing it right now, in every playthrough. And Braun isn't unique. Vault-Tec built multiple simulation programs. Tranquility Lane was just the one where the overseer went insane. The others are still running, still torturing their residents, controlled by administrators who haven't seen reality in 200 years. How many virtual hells exist in sealed vaults across America? How many people are trapped in perfect suburban nightmares? The simulation technology Braun used is the same foundation the Institute builds on. Virtual consciousness, digital immortality, uploading human minds. Braun was the prototype for something much bigger, but at least Tranquility Lane's horror was contained to one vault. The next mystery infected an entire ecosystem, Vault 22. Vault-Tec's agricultural experiment seemed harmless compared to the others, just scientists trying to solve food scarcity with genetically modified plants. Then the plants started growing in people's lungs. Vault 22's experiment involved developing a pest control fungus that would protect crops without harmful chemicals. The scientists modified a strain of fungus to target insects, and it worked perfectly until it mutated and decided humans made even better hosts. The infection spread through spores released by the plants, and once you breathed them in, you were done. The fungus would germinate inside your respiratory system, spreading through your body and slowly transforming you into what the Wasteland calls a spore carrier, a shambling infected human who exists only to spread more spores to new hosts. Vault 22's logs describe the outbreak in horrifying detail. Residents coughing up blood and plant matter, people developing green mold on their skin, and the final entries from survivors barricaded in the lower levels as infected former friends tried to break through. The survivors eventually fled to Zion Canyon, and we know how that ended because you can find their remains in Fallout New Vegas, massacred by tribals who didn't understand the spore carriers weren't human anymore. The vault itself became a vertical jungle where the fungus took over completely, with infected humans still shambling through the corridors decades later, spreading spores that can infect any new visitors stupid enough to breathe without a mask. What makes Vault 22 uniquely disturbing is how slow and inevitable the infection was. These weren't people who died quickly or turned into mindless ghouls. They stayed conscious during their transformation, aware they were becoming something else, knowing they'd eventually lose themselves to the fungus wearing their bodies like suits. The Brotherhood of Steel wants the agricultural data from Vault 22, but they have no idea they're asking you to retrieve research from humanity's worst biological disaster. This wasn't an accident. The scientists kept experimenting even after they knew the fungus was dangerous, because stopping would mean admitting they'd created a plague. But Vault 22's fungus has a feature that doesn't get enough attention. It's intelligent. Not in the way humans are intelligent, but it learns and adapts. The spore carriers aren't random shambling zombies. They coordinate, they set up ambushes, they protect the fungal colonies. The infection isn't just hijacking human bodies, it's networking them into a collective organism. Every infected person becomes a node in a distributed intelligence that spans the entire vault. The Brotherhood wants that agricultural data, but they don't realize what they're really asking for. The fungus wasn't designed to control pests, it was designed to control populations, and it's still spreading, slowly, underground, through connected root systems that span hundreds of miles. Vault 22 wasn't the outbreak, it was the test site, and the test succeeded. And speaking of plagues, the next location shows what happens when ideology becomes more infectious than any disease: Nipton. Caesar's Legion did a lot of messed up things during their campaign, but what they did to Nipton stands out as pure psychological warfare. This wasn't just conquest, it was a message written in corpses. Nipton was a small Nevada town that survived the apocalypse by playing every faction against each other, selling information and supplies to whoever paid. Mayor Joseph Stein thought he was being clever, staying neutral while profiting from everyone's conflict. Then Vulpes and Kulta showed up with a plan to demonstrate what happens when you bet on the wrong side. The Legion rounded up every person in town, including NCR soldiers, powder gangers, and the civilians who'd been selling to both sides. They held a lottery where winners got to live as slaves, runners-up got crucified, and the losers were burned alive in their homes. Mayor Stein himself was forced to watch while his entire town got destroyed. Then they crucified him facing the aftermath so he could die slowly while staring at his failure. The Legion didn't just kill Nipton, they turned it into a monument to betrayal, with crucified victims still hanging on crosses along the highway to warn travelers about the cost of opposing Caesar. When you arrive, the place reeks of burned flesh and despair, with Vulpes calmly explaining his philosophy while standing among the bodies. He gives you Stein's personal lottery ticket as a souvenir, marking you as a witness who survived to spread the tale. This wasn't about military strategy, it was about breaking people's will to resist by showing that neutrality isn't an option. The Legion transformed an entire settlement into a cautionary tale about the price of cowardice. What makes Nipton stand out from other Legion atrocities is the methodical cruelty. They used the town's own greed against itself, turning its survival strategy into the cause of its destruction. You can still hear Mayor Stein moaning on his cross, taking days to die while the Legion moved on to their next target. Vulpes Inculta is smart though, smarter than people give him credit for. He didn't choose Nipton randomly, he chose a town that represented everything Caesar's philosophy opposes: moral relativism, profit over principle, neutrality. The lottery wasn't random either. He knew exactly who'd win. He'd studied the town for weeks. Every outcome was predetermined. The horror wasn't the randomness, it was the illusion of choice. Just like Vault 11, just like Tranquility Lane. The Wasteland keeps teaching the same lesson. Your choices don't matter when someone else wrote the outcomes. But Legion cruelty was at least motivated by conquest. The next horror came from the best intentions gone completely wrong. The Pit. Pittsburgh survived the nuclear apocalypse only to become something worse than a radioactive crater. The Pit is what happens when industrial hell meets wasteland survival, and nobody wins. The city's steel mills somehow kept running after the bombs, making it strategically valuable and completely toxic at the same time. The river and air are so irradiated that long-term exposure mutates people into trogs, mindless, degraded humans who attack anything they see, and there's no cure or prevention beyond leaving the city entirely. The remaining population split into two factions: Asher's raiders who run the mills and use slaves to extract steel, and the slaves themselves who dream of freedom, while slowly turning into trogs. Asher isn't your typical raider boss though. He genuinely believes he's rebuilding civilization by maintaining industrial capacity, and his baby daughter Marie might be the genetic key to curing the trog mutation. The slaves see things differently. They're worked to death in radioactive mills, knowing they're sacrificing their humanity for steel that profits their captors. The moral complexity gets worse when you realize Asher needs the slave labor to keep the mills running, which produces the only source of high-quality steel in the wasteland, and without that steel, the entire region's reconstruction efforts collapse. So you're left choosing between freeing slaves who will likely turn into trogs anyway once the mills shut down, or supporting a system built on suffering that might actually save more lives in the long run. The Pit doesn't give you clean answers, it forces you to decide whose suffering matters more and live with the consequences. Every slave you see is already infected, already dying, and nothing you do will save them. This is wasteland utilitarianism at its darkest, the question of how many people you can sacrifice for the greater good, and whether greater good means anything when it's built on broken bodies and stolen futures. Asher's cure exists in his daughter's DNA, but using it means deciding one child's blood is worth more than freedom for hundreds of slaves. The Pit proves that sometimes the apocalypse's worst aspect isn't the destruction, it's the impossible choices survivors have to make to keep breathing. And the steel mills keep churning, because they always do, no matter who's feeding them. Asher's daughter Marie represents something the series barely explores though. She's naturally immune to the trog mutation. Not resistant, immune, which means her DNA has something the rest of humanity lacks. Something that could rewrite what humans become after radiation exposure. The Pit's slaves are dying for steel, but Marie's DNA could cure every radiation mutation in the wasteland. Ghouls, super mutants, spore carriers, everything. Asher knows this. He's not just rebuilding civilization with steel, he's rebuilding it with genetics. The same way Vault-Tec planned, the same way the Enclave wanted, the same way the Institute is doing. Everyone with power in the Fallout universe eventually decides they need to genetically modify humanity to save it, and they're all willing to sacrifice thousands to do it. Though Pit's horror came from necessity, our next mystery was pure scientific curiosity with zero ethics attached. Big Empty. The Big Mountain Research and Development Center represents everything wrong with pre-war science culture: unlimited funding, no oversight, and researchers who treated ethics as optional suggestions. What they created makes Vault-Tec look responsible. Big Empty's scientists were working on projects that ranged from world-changing to absolutely deranged. They developed stealth suit technology, sonic weapons, and genetic modifications alongside experiments like extracting people's brains for robotics and creating cyberdogs from pre-war pets. The think tank, the facility's leadership, literally removed their own brains and put them in floating jars with robotic robotic screens, giving up their humanity to pursue immortal research. They kidnapped people from the wasteland for experiments, erased their memories, and sent them back without explanation, including your own character if you play the Old World Blues DLC. The facility ran for 200 years after the bombs dropped because the scientists couldn't remember the world had ended. Their brain preservation process damaged their long-term memory so severely that they forgot the apocalypse happened and kept working on their insane projects. You'll find test subjects who had their skeletons replaced with robotic frames, patients whose hearts and spines were extracted as independent experiments, and enough failed genetic modifications to populate a nightmare zoo. The Biological Research Station alone contains pods full of abominations that were human before Big MT's scientists decided to improve them. What makes Big MT especially disturbing is how excited these researchers are about their work. They don't see themselves as monsters, they see themselves as pioneers pushing the boundaries of human knowledge. And they're not entirely wrong. The technology they developed could revolutionize the wasteland. If you ignore the pile of bodies it took to create, this is science without conscience, progress without consideration for who pays the price. The think tank traded their humanity for immortality and scientific achievement, not realizing they'd already lost everything that mattered. Big MT shows the dark side of the Fallout universe's retrofuturism. All that optimism about science saving humanity twisted into experiments that should never have been approved. The facility still runs, still experiments, still believes it's helping. The think tank's memory problems aren't just damaged though, they're deliberate. You find evidence scattered through terminals that they erased their own memories of the outside world. They chose to forget the apocalypse. They chose to forget the people they hurt. They chose to forget everything except their research, because remembering would mean confronting what they'd become. It's the same logic that drove Vault-Tec, the same logic that created the FEV, the same logic behind every horror in this list. If you can't remember your humanity, you can't mourn its loss. The scientists didn't lose their ethics. They surgically removed them. But Big MT's scientists at least kept their research behind closed doors. Our next horror story trapped visitors in a casino they could never leave. Sierra Madre. The Sierra Madre Casino was supposed to be Frederick Sinclair's gift to his love, Vera Keyes, an impregnable fortress of luxury that could survive nuclear war. Instead, it became a tomb that kills everyone who enters, and it's been doing it for 200 years. Sinclair built the casino with experimental security systems that included explosive collars, holographic security guards, and a cloud of toxic gas that fills the streets and dissolves organic matter. When the bombs fell, the systems locked down with staff and guests still inside, trapping them in what became known as the Ghost People, humans who mutated inside hazmat suits and now shamble through the poisonous cloud, attacking anyone new. The casino itself is pristine, untouched by time or radiation, filled with pre-war treasures and Sierra Madre chips worth more than anything in the wasteland. But the explosive collars Sinclair used for construction workers are still active, and they'll detonate if you try to leave, or if your companions die, forcing impossible choices about who lives. The toxic cloud causes instant damage on contact, and there's no cure, just temporary protective measures that wear off. Sinclair's dream of impregnable security became a trap that's claimed hundreds of treasure hunters who thought they could beat the casino's defenses. The Dead Money DLC makes you experience the Sierra Madre's horror firsthand, forced to work with other desperate people while knowing the collars ensure you can't trust anyone completely. You're competing for survival in a location that was designed to keep everyone inside forever. What destroys people about the Sierra Madre isn't just the death traps or the ghost people, it's the greed. You can see the treasures, touch the gold bars, imagine yourself rich beyond measure. But the explosive collar means you can only carry what you can sprint with. Sinclair's love letter to Vera became a metaphor for letting go, teaching survivors that some treasures cost more than their worth. The Sierra Madre doesn't just kill you physically, it breaks you psychologically, forcing you to choose between wealth and freedom, between saving your companions and saving yourself. And Sinclair's ghost still broadcasts his message about letting go, not realizing he created a monument to exactly the opposite. But here's the connection nobody makes. Frederick Sinclair worked with Vault-Tec on the Sierra Madre's security systems. The same company that built the vaults built his casino. The same philosophy, the same technology, the same goal of creating an environment that tests human nature under impossible pressure. Sinclair wanted to know if love could survive absolute security. Vault-Tec wanted to know if society could survive extreme conditions. They're asking the same question with different variables, and they got the same answer. Humans break every time in predictable ways, ways that can be measured, documented, and replicated. The truly disturbing part isn't any individual mystery. It's that they're all connected by the same philosophy. Pre-war America's scientific and corporate elite looked at humanity and decided it needed to be improved, fixed, rewritten, and they were willing to do anything to figure out how. Vault-Tec ran social experiments. West Tech ran genetic experiments. Big MT ran biological chemical experiments. The Enclave ran extinction experiments. The Institute ran replacement experiments. Every faction with resources decided the problem with humanity was humanity itself. And here's the kicker. They might be right. Every survivor in the wasteland is a descendant of people who either participated in these experiments or survived them. The Vault Dwellers, the super mutants, the ghouls, the synths, the wastelanders. Everyone living 200 years after the bombs is already post-human in some way, already changed, already modified. The experiments never stopped. They just moved from controlled environments into the wild. The bombs didn't end civilization. They freed these experiments from containment and let them run at scale. The wasteland isn't humanity recovering from disaster. It's humanity being actively rewritten. And somewhere, in a sealed lab or a hidden vault or an underground facility, someone is still taking notes, still collecting data, still trying to answer that question. How much can you change humanity before it stops being human? The Fallout universe has been running that experiment for 200 years, and it still doesn't have an answer. Almost every vault in Fallout is horrifying, because that's the point. They were experiments meant to test what people would do in horrible situations. But there are some that are so bad, they'll make you question the sanity of the devs that created them. So with that cheerful note out of the way, let's go traumatize ourselves. First things first, let's cover Ol Reliable, Vault 22, the Green Hell. In every other vault, you eat plants. In Vault 22, the plants eat you. Vault 22 is easily one of Fallout's most infamous vaults, and does deserve a spot on this list. I don't know, it just feels like everyone who has made a video on vaults or New Vegas has talked about it, and I'd be torn apart in the comments section if I didn't cover it here. So here we go. The vault was staffed by pre-war scientists trying to solve global hunger by genetically modifying crops. It's a noble idea, since even ignoring the rest of the world, who are undoubtedly doing worse. By the 2070s, in the USA, international trade had collapsed. The US population had ballooned past 400 million, and shortage riots becoming more and more common. Feeding America was becoming a problem. Vault 22 was supposed to be the solution to that problem, and it was promising. The government and a few private partners donated plenty of money and biosamples, including a new fungal strain from the geniuses over at Big Mountain Research Facility. That fungus, Bovaria mordicana, was basically Fallout's version of Cordyceps from The Last of Us. It infected its host, killed it, then puppeted the corpse to spread spores to new victims. Its purpose was to eradicate pests that would usually ruin crops. Unfortunately, it had three main issues. The first was it took as long as 3 weeks from infection to kill the pest. The second was because of the way it spread, needing close proximity to spores, it didn't work with any animals that weren't social and spent time around others. And third, it could infect people, and that was the true experiment of Vault 22. Big Mountain, in collaboration with Vault Tech, wanted to see what would happen in a sealed environment with a recycled air system and a few hundred test subjects. The infection spread fast. Vault dwellers started getting chills, fevers, and a hacking cough, caused by the fungus coating the lungs. The fungus sunk deep into the body, enough to force it to violently reject any antifungal treatments. Eventually, organs shut down and people died. And then we get to the bad part, because then people got back up again as spore carriers, who would attack any uninfected. By 2296, the vault was in chaos with an airborne plague and literal zombies. The last scientist planned to flood the lowest level with gas and ignite it, going literal scorched earth to try and burn out the infection. But the spore carriers somehow sensed the gas and swarmed the team before they could trigger the blast. By 2096, barely 20 years after the Great War, Vault 22 was lost. The survivors fled north, leaving the door open behind them. The plants grew unchecked, covering the vault and the surrounding area in lush greenery. A stark, horrifying contrast to the surrounding Mojave Desert. Thankfully, the spores aren't seemingly able to spread in the open air, but anyone foolish enough to go inside never comes back. The vault green exterior lures explorers in, and the spore carriers make sure they stay forever. And the story doesn't even end there. The handful of survivors who escaped fled into Zion National Park. Hardened by what they'd seen, they became isolationist, violent, and worse, still infected. Some died of the disease. Others died when a certain very angry army veteran went open season on them after they ate the locals to survive. Their bodies eventually rose again and retreated into Zion's caves, where the fungus could grow undisturbed. As for the last survivors of Vault 22 that fled once again out of Zion, we never hear from them again. But given their social skills and the fact they were infected, I don't think they or anyone else around them had a happy ending. But hey, at least throughout it all, they never fell into infighting. The same can't be said of the next vault. Vault 11, the death penalty vault, deep in the Mojave sits Vault 11. And unlike most vaults, it's completely empty. When its residents first entered, the door sealed shut behind them and couldn't be opened. And the vault computer told them of the vault's special rule each year: one person must enter a special execution chamber. If they didn't do that, the vault's life support systems would shut down, killing everyone. Only the original overseer knew this before the door sealed. And when the others found out he'd kept it secret, they, democratically, decided that the overseer should be the first sacrifice. Thus began the proud Vault 11 tradition tradition of electing an overseer every year and sending them to die when their term ended. Soon, elections became a twisted parody of American politics. Posters littered the halls. Don't vote for Glover. His family needs him. Rumors about Haley are baseless. Vote Stone for overseer. And just like real life, several political parties formed. Large voting blocks that would pool their votes together to control who lived and who died. Over time, these blocks grew more powerful and corrupt. The leader of one of these blocks eventually forced a woman named Catherine Stoner to cheat on her husband with him, or her husband would be nominated for overseer, guaranteeing his death. She did what he said, and then the block leader nominated her husband anyway. Catherine responded with what people who study politics commonly call Plan B, mass murder. She went full Rambo, hunting down every Justice Block member she could find. In any other vault, she'd have been executed. In Vault 11, however, that would be a waste. In fact, this made her the perfect candidate for overseer. However, this was exactly what she wanted, for 3 reasons. 1. She got revenge on the voting bloc that betrayed her. 2. Her being nominated meant her husband wasn't, saving him. And 3. As overseer, she had the authority to alter the vault computer programming, changing the yearly selection of overseer from an election to be chosen completely and totally randomly. This, to put it lightly, was not received well. And by that, I mean a full-blown civil war erupted as the vault lost its mind with voting blocks going into all-out revolt. When the fighting finally ended, there were only 5 survivors. Those last 5, broken and done with it all, decided to end the cycle. They marched into the sacrifice chamber together, told the Vault AI that they are done. No longer will they send one to die, but they will die as one. And then, a pre-recorded message congratulated them. The Vault AI was never going to shut off the life support. They had passed the test of the vault. The vault door unlocked and they were all free to go. So all that death and chaos and betrayal was for absolutely nothing. Of the 5, 4 immediately shot themselves. The 5th walked out into the Mojave, never to be seen again. Alright, you did well sitting through a more subtle vault. We'll go to a more on-the-nose one. Vault 87, the super mutant hotspot. Vault 87 is arguably the closest we get to a genuine horror movie in Fallout, or at least one that won't get them sued by Naughty Dog. Whatever its original experiment was supposed to be was scrapped in 2076, when the US government decided to repurpose it as a secondary testing site for the forced evolutionary virus. It made sense since West Tech's main facility in California was probably going to get nuked, so setting up a backup lab and a bomb-proof vault was good planning. Good for the scientists anyway, not for the residents. So when the bombs fell, the dwellers crowded into a death trap. And I mean this literally. Within the first decade or so, over 90 deaths were reported, an insane number for any vault. In most cases, the bodies were quickly disposed of, except they weren't. 90% of those deaths were fake. The so-called deceased were abducted and taken to the restricted experimental wing for FEV experiments. The virus had been modified to emphasize certain beneficial traits: strength, endurance, resistance, i.e., it created super mutants. Most subjects gained muscle mass, lost all their hair, and lost most of their brain function. At least one forgot how to breathe, and simply died. And again, I need to emphasize that transforming from FEV exposure is the most excruciating thing a human being can go through. Imagine pulling a muscle, except it's every single muscle on your body, along with every bone violently pushing and growing and morphing. And of course, it could just not work, and you end up dying as your body grows 8 spleens but destroys your lungs because FEV isn't stable. But of course, the scientists kept going because progress was progress. And of course, with so many people disappearing, much of the rest of the vault was in mourning. One technician started hearing children's voices echoing through the walls and was told he was going insane. He wasn't. He was hearing the kids from Little Lamplight, a nearby cave where children had taken refuge after the war. But that's another whole thing we might get into in another video. Another man, who was told his wife had died, decided 5 stages of grief was too much and stopped on rage. He was convinced the scientists had killed her and plotted to murder them. We don't know exactly what happened, but we can make an educated guess. The grieving husband broke into the restricted labs to attack the scientists, and the test subjects escaped in the process. Mentally broken super mutants rampaged through the vault, killing or converting everyone they found. When they ran out of people to eat or turn into more of their own, they left the vault to plague the Capital Wasteland's people, killing and eating the weak while bringing the strong back to make into more super mutants. But there's one more tragedy in this, one more twist that makes this whole thing read like a Stephen King book. The man's wife wasn't a test subject. She just died of cancer, one of the very few natural deaths in the vault. The doctors just failed to properly console a grieving man, and he went off the deep end. So Vault 87, and the entire Capital Wasteland by extension, didn't collapse because of the horrible, inhumane experiments. It collapsed because of one man's misunderstanding and the failure of doctors to realize how badly he was grieving. Unfortunately, this was not the only vault designed to turn people into abominations. Vault 12, the Living Cemetery. Vault 12 is probably the most straightforward, disturbing vault in Fallout. Located beneath Bakersfield, California, it stores story is simple. The vault door never fully closed. When the bombs fell on October 23, 2077, every other vault in America sealed tight, except this one. The residents entered, the door didn't close completely, and soon word spread that the vault was still open. Crowds from nearby forced their way in, cramming themselves into the vault for safety. In hindsight, it would probably have been better if they stayed outside and died. Because the jammed door wasn't a malfunction, it was intentional. The vault itself was designed to keep its inhabitants safe from raiders, famine, and any other potential factors. Except one. By keeping the door open, it guaranteed radiation could leak in. Because the experiment of this vault was to study the effects of radiation poisoning. Now, players often forget what radiation poisoning actually means. In the newer games, it's just a simple red bar pressing down on your health bar, to the point you could die from a stubbed toe. Or in Fallout 3 in New Vegas, a minor stat penalty that you can fix with a dose of Radaway. In reality, radiation doesn't just hurt you, it breaks you. It tears through the body on a cellular level, shifting atoms and shredding DNA in every cell it touches. If your body is a temple, radiation isn't damaging the building, it's replacing the bricks with mud, which causes that temple, like your body, to fall apart. And while most illnesses cause symptoms because your body is fighting back, radiation sickness is the opposite. The symptoms, vomiting, bleeding, burns, organ failure, are signs your body is literally falling apart. Your cells stop dividing properly, your tissues stop healing, and everything that keeps you alive begins to disintegrate from the inside out. It's slow, it's messy, and it's agonizing. So imagine thousands of people huddled in a vault, thinking they'd escape death, only to spend days, weeks, or months suffering to the point they would have welcomed it. And the worst part is, some didn't even get that, because some survived. Their skin peeled away, their hair fell out, and they began rotting, but somehow they kept walking. They became ghouls. And being a ghoul is arguably worse than dying, your body rotting in slow motion. And most regular people treat you horribly, if not outright shoot you on sight, and you get to watch other ghouls go feral, knowing that one day you'll join them. The ferals don't attack you, of course, because they see you as one of them, since if you live long enough, you will be. A great thought at the back of every ghoul's mind. And whether Vault-Tec expected that outcome is anyone's guess, but the result was the same. Vault 12 became the single largest source of ghouls in all of California, if not the entire western USA. Bakersfield became Necropolis, the city of the dead. After it was destroyed by the Master's army, its survivors fled south and founded Dayglow, one of the founding cities of the NCR. So technically, Vault 12 was a success. It proved that humans could survive extreme radiation poisoning by becoming something that barely counts as human. The good news is, even after 200 years, they're still alive. The bad news is even after 200 years, they're still alive. For no other reason than the number we're jumping from Vault 12 to Vault 112. Vault 112, the virtual hell. In the Capital Wasteland, under a pretty unremarkable garage infested with mole rats, lies Vault 112. It's one of the smallest vaults in the series. But it's not the size that matters, but how much it traumatizes people. Okay, that analogy fell apart. Moving on. On paper, Vault 112 sounded like paradise. Every resident would live inside a virtual reality utopia, each person sealed in a stasis pod and uploaded into a simulation where every desire was fulfilled. In any other context, yeah, that would be dystopian. But when the world ends and you're stuck in a glorified basement, and screw it, plug me in. To make things even better, the vault's overseer was Dr. Stanislaus Braun himself, a brilliant German scientist that had moved to the US and was responsible for multiple pre-war breakthroughs, including the Garden of Eden creation kit. There wasn't anyone alive that had better knowledge of that kind of tech than him, especially after the bombs fell. If anyone could keep the simulation running, it was him. Unfortunately, Braun is the problem, because Vault 112 was his reward from Vault-Tec and the US military for years of service, a personal kingdom where he could play God, with the Dwellers as his toys. Imagine Sword Art Online and Braun was the admin. The simulation was his playground, and he got bored quickly, so he started torturing the other people for fun, sometimes physically, sometimes emotionally. But hey, the good news was, they didn't remember it, because he kept wiping their memories. The residents would suffer, then forget, and Braun would start again. An infinite loop of cheerful ignorance, sudden extreme trauma, and back to life as usual. Over and over and over again. And ignorance is bliss. Because one resident, Old Lady Dithers, wasn't properly plugged into the simulation, so she was aware she was in one, and remembered the horrible stuff Braun did. I don't know what's worse, knowing that she's in a simulation, or that no one else believes her. And if you're wondering why you find them all still alive in Fallout 3 200 years later, it's because their pods keep them in biological stasis. If they step out, and they would probably die instantly, either rapidly aging or infection, but so long as they stay inside, they get to live and be tortured forever. Yay! In-game. When you go into the simulation, you get two options. Play along with Braun's twisted games until he's satisfied and lets you go. Hack the system and kill everyone but Braun, freeing the Vaulters from purgatory while trapping Braun in a new one, since he's stuck in his simulation alone forever now. You know, a vault's disturbing when the good ending is just killing the residents. And speaking of killing residents, Vault 75, the eugenics vault. So the disturbing thing about Vault 75 is, well, eugenics. Yeah, just eugenics. I don't really have a fun way to sugarcoat that one. Vault 75 sits beneath Malden Middle School in the Commonwealth and offered discounted spots to students and their families. When they arrived after the bombs fell, the parents were separated for processing. They were never seen again. The children were then told that the uptop land, or what we call the wasteland, was a dangerous place, and that they must be trained to survive it when they become an adult. Trained, meaning a lifetime of brutal physical and mental testing until they turned 18, when they'd supposedly graduate and head to the surface to rebuild society. Of course, that was a lie. Vault 75's real purpose was to create genetically superior super soldiers. The Vault's scientists ran endless evaluations to identify exceptional genes: strength, intelligence, agility, anything that could be replicated. Also, one of the main supporters of this project was none other than Dr. Stanislaus Braun, the same German scientist from Vault 112. Some things never change. Anyway, when each child turned 18, they faced three possible fates. The physically gifted were harvested, their organs and DNA used to clone the next batch of better babies. The highly intelligent were recruited to replace the scientists and continue the experiment. Everyone else went to the incinerator. Except there's one tiny problem with this experiment. Well, besides, eugenics. Because like most people who love eugenics, Vault-Tec had absolutely no idea how genetics actually works. Eugenics, in theory, is just selective breeding, letting only certain members of a species reproduce to make more desirable traits. That's how we ended up with pugs, greyhounds, and basically every dog that can't breathe properly. But there isn't a 1-1 gene for everything. There's no single smart or strong gene you can just isolate. A mother with a six-pack doesn't give to a baby with a six-pack, and a rocket scientist's kid can still eat glue. However, while this experiment was eventually doomed to fail, the people inside decided to speed it up. Exact details are sparse, but here's the image I pieced together. A newly recruited junior scientist started asking why the Vault never contacted its graduates on the surface. When his superiors brushed him off, he thought that was sus. So did some digging and uncovered the truth. He then secretly smuggled weapons to the kids he was supposed to supervise. And those kids, who'd spent their whole lives training to fight, used those weapons to overthrow the scientists in a violent revolt and escape. And as messed up as it is, this is one of the few Vault stories that ends with something close to a happy ending. A single compassionate scientist rejected indoctrination and instead worked with his peers to fight against a common enemy. So maybe, in a twisted way, Vault 75's experiment finally succeeded. Not in what it was meant to do, but ironically, in the lie. They created a generation of kids who were compassionate enough to unite against them, escape, and use the skills they learned to finally live above ground. Now there's plenty of other vaults that deserve spots on this list, like Vault 4 or 51, but those will be covered in other videos. Instead, how about we do something a little different? A spin on a vault not talked about very much on these sorts of videos because of how vanilla it seems? In my opinion, it's all 31 flavors of insanity. And to those of you who got this joke, what are you still doing up this late? Bedtime in the nursing home starts at 6 p.m. Now that I've ticked off my primary audience, it's time to double down with this honorable mention, special mention Vault 76. You can't stop me. This is my video. Now, you might be saying, but Ghoul, Vault 76 was a control vault. Everyone lived in luxury for 25 years before leaving. And to that, I say, yes. But in the words of contemporary philosopher Solid JJ, have you considered the implications? Because look, Fallout 76 is a fun game. I've had a lot of fun playing it, but fun to play doesn't mean fun to live in. Call of Duty is fun too, but if you told an Iraq veteran his dead friends just had a skill issue because you easily survived 20 gunshots in multiplayer, you're getting punched in the face. It's the same thing here. Sure, the game is easy for us to play, but imagine what our in-game characters are actually going through. Vault 76's residents, handpicked successful businessmen and women and their kids, were expecting to leave the vault and rebuild West Virginia. At best, the dangers they were prepared for were radiation poisoning, environmental pollution, and some raiders. But when those doors opened onto the lands of West Virginia, what they found wasn't almost heaven, it was complete hell. To list out that they had to deal with in no particular order: super mutants, giant green ogres that want to kill and eat you, not necessarily in that order, or transform you into one of them, which is one of the most painful things a human being can experience. Literal zombies in the form of feral ghouls, an entire region called the Ash Heap, which is so polluted you can't find a single square inch of ground not covered in ash, which, by the way, is carried by the wind to the rest of Appalachia, guaranteeing black lung no matter where you are. Every animal suddenly grows 10 times bigger and discovers a love for human flesh. Radroaches, mirelurks, rad scorpions. And who could forget the humble Deathclaw? Every single fictional monster from folklore is no longer fictional, either because it actually existed pre-war and you now have the privilege of getting eaten by it, or because the name was given to something just as if not more horrifying that was created after the war. We got the Wendigo, the Blue Devil, Chupacabra, and every flavor of Mothman you can think of. Aliens that abduct people to mutate into more monsters just to dump them back to Earth to terrorize the population. A whole new wonderful list of mutated diseases you catch just by standing in a puddle. The vast majority of robots in a region going full Skynet and murdering everything on sight. And, of course, bats the size of commercial airplanes that infect you with a plague that causes your skin to burn and grow green crystals while you slowly lose your mind to a hive mind. And yes, you feel everything. Welcome home, Vault Dweller. Country roads, take me the hell out of here. And even if you survive all that, what's the reward? You get to live another day in hell. But ghoul, you say, we are rebuilding West Virginia. And to that, dear Strawman, I say, did you? Appalachia is never mentioned again in any later Fallout game. Not once. Yes, that's mostly because 76 came out most recently. But until it's mentioned in a future game, I'm counting a mission as canon. Fight me. All your victories, curing the Scorched Plague, saving Appalachia from disaster after disaster, building literal cities from scratch, none of it mattered. Even in Fallout 3 when you go to the pit, a stone's throw from the game area of Fallout 76, and where you actually go in Fallout 76, there's no mention of the Vault 76 dwellers anywhere, which means one thing: everything you built became dust and every sacrifice you made was erased by time. The only thing worse than failing to achieve greatness is achieving it and being completely forgotten. And personally, that's at least disturbing to me. And that's it, we're done. If you enjoyed this video and want to see every Vault experiment explained, click the video on screen now.